Going into live stream. Okay, good morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock, so we're going to start the meeting this morning. I would like to start by welcoming everyone here. Hopefully, we'll have a very interesting discussion today. We've got, for the first time, we've got a Zoom contributor to the board. So please bear with Rob as we try and manage that technology. If you want to speak and you're on Zoom, please raise your virtual hand rather than just coming in so we can try and keep some order. Today's meeting has been streamed live on YouTube as normal. If you're watching live, you can find the meeting papers that we're all looking at on the council's website. I just usually put it into a search engine and it comes up pretty quickly. So let's start with introductions, if that's okay. So I'm Councillor Andrew Scopes. I represent the Beeston Holbeck ward and I'm the chair of this board. We'll go this way, please.
I'm Debbie Alderman. I'm the clerk to the board.
Morning, everyone. I'm Councillor Sharon Hamilton, Meanwood and Moortown ward.
Good morning. I'm Councillor David Jenkins from Killingbeck and Seacroft ward, and I'm substituting for Councillor Hesselwood.
Morning, everyone. Councillor Peter Carlisle, Carverley and Farsley ward.
Good morning, Councillor Sharon Burke, Middleton Park ward.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Denise Reagan from Bermondsey and Richmond Hill. I'm here as the visitor from the Health, Housing and Environmental Scrutiny Board because we're doing a joint inquiry.
Good morning all, I'm Councillor Jim McKenna and I am an Armley councillor.
Councillor Paul Wadsworth, I represent Guysing Road and I'm substituting for Councillor Firth.
Councillor Conrad Hartbrook from Rothwell ward. I'm substituting for Diane Chapman.
Councillor Simon Seary from the Pudsey ward.
Rob Clayton, I'm Principal Scrutiny Advisor to the board.
Thank you. Can we have the officers at the table as well?
Good morning, Jason Singh. I'm the Council's Head of Environmental Action.
I'm Rosie Harvey. I'm an officer in the contracts team for waste management.
I'm Ed Walton, Business Officer, Waste Contracts.
Amanda Pitt. I manage the Veolia contract.
Philip Turpin, Senior Business Officer, work for the Veolia contract.
Robin Akers, and I'm a Director of HW Martin Waste.
Declan Norcliffe, HB Martin Waste.
Polly Kirk, Chief Officer for Sustainable Energy and Air Quality.
John Woolmer, Acting Chief Officer for Environmental Services.
Good morning, James Rogers, Director of Communities, Housing and Environment.
Hi, Kevin Mulvaney, Head of Finance, Communities, Housing and Environment.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for the guests for taking the time to join the meeting here today. We've got lots of people here to speak about the joint inquiry, which I'm personally very interested in. We just need to run through some sort of business as usual items, and then we'll come to that item as the main item. So if I pass over to Debbie. I think we're just getting some noise from the Zoom call, but if you guys just mute yourself for a minute and we'll bring you in a minute. Okay, thank you. Okay, Debbie.
Thank you, Chair. Under agenda item 1, there are no appeals against refusal of inspection of documents. Under agenda item 2, there are no exempt items. Agenda item 3, there are no formal late items, although there has been some supplementary information in relation to agenda item 7, and all members should have received a copy of that. Under agenda item 4, could I ask members to disclose any declarations of interest? I'll take silence as there are none. And agenda item 5, apologies have been received from Councillors Hesselwood, Firth and Chapman. Councillor Jenkins is substitute for Councillor Hesselwood, Councillor Wadsworth is substitute for Councillor Firth, and Councillor Hartbrook is substitute for Councillor Chapman. We also have Councillors Reagan and Councillor Barry Anderson was due to attend for this item 7. That's it. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. I've received apologies from Councillor Anderson. I think he's unwell today. So we send him our best wishes. Can I just also allow Veolia to introduce themselves? You can just check your microphones work. No, we can't hear you very well. So I'm going to move on for the moment. I'll turn my microphone off and let you try speaking again. No, it's not working at the moment, but we'll move on. Okay, so going to move on to the minutes. That doesn't look like they're on mute. We'll move on to the minutes from the last meeting. Can I firstly take any matters of accuracy in the minutes? Okay, take those as agreed. I'm going to pass to Rob to run through matters arising.
Thank you, Councillor Scopes. Just briefly, conscious of people in the room for the substantive item 7. Minute 20, board members have been interested in inclusion over recent meetings, September, October. Just to update on that and say that is coming back in January with representation from staff networks to attend the board and provide evidence to us. Minute 21, which related to the Leeds 2023, additional information should have been sent to members, so that should be with you, and please get back to me with any questions on that. Minute 25, which related to devolution and thoughts of members wanting to bring that item back to this board this year. The chair and I are discussing that with a view to planning it into our work programme. And then on the same minute, the working group on the 13th of December has been expanded to take account of discussion that we had on the work programme last time to include an additional item, which should hopefully free up the workload a little bit of the board, as I know members were a bit concerned about it being quite full on at the minute. So that hopefully should spread the work out a bit and create more time for us to look at issues in more detail. I think that's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments from board members? No. Okay, so let's move on to agenda item 7. I think Amanda Pitt, are you starting us off? So I'll hand over to you.
Apologies. Good morning, everybody. We've been asked to come today to talk about the key contracts within waste management. Myself and Philip Turpin, we represent the Veolia contract, and Ed and Rosie look after the rest of the extensive range of contracts that we have. So I'll talk through the Residual PFI contract first of all. Sorry. Thank you. Okay, so the RERF contract is a 25-year PFI contract based on SOPC 4 with derivations where required. It's a contract only for the treatment of residual waste, and currently it's in the 6th year of operations, with the contract not due to expire until 2041. It's a design, build and operate contract scaled specifically to deal with the council's projected waste tonnage over the life of the contract, with a small amount of excess capacity to give flexibility to cope with waste flow variations and some third-party waste capacity. The technical solution offered by Veolia was a mechanical pre-treatment for the extraction of recyclates at the front end of the process, followed by energy from waste for the treatment of waste that cannot be recycled. There are 3 key targets in the contract. These are diversion from landfill, which is not less than 96.5%, BMW diversion, which is a tonnage allowance given per year, and recycling, which originally was 10% but was reduced to 2% in April 2020. As you can see from the slide there, the performance for the previous contract year 2020 to 21, all targets were exceeded. In addition to the key targets, there are an extensive performance mechanism regime that covers all aspects of the service, and which the contract management team continuously monitor against to ensure day-to-day service performance standards and service expectations are achieved. If not achieved, the relevant associated penalties are applied and resolutions sought and monitored to a successful conclusion. As noted above, the recycling target was reduced in 2020 to 2%. This followed continued issues with recycling performance, which really began at the start of the contract. The only solution for persistent breach of this key target under the contract was termination, but all parties considered that this was an otherwise successful contract, delivering many other benefits, and the contractor worked hard to resolve the recycling problems. They increased the shifts on the mechanical pretreatment from 2 to 3 a day. They introduced an extensive cleaning regime, installing additional access to all areas of the plant for better cleaning, and they replaced key and significant pieces of equipment at the front end of the process. And they also built an additional facility on a site to the rear of the roof to try and clean up the paper and card materials to make them more marketable. But despite all these actions, we saw a small increase in recycling, but not significant and not enough to achieve the target. So with DEFRA's approval, a proportion of the MPT has been mothballed for a period of 7 years, and the recycling key target has been reduced temporarily. Currently, metals of all types are the only materials being targeted for recycling, and in return for a significant annual compensation payment by Veolia. It should be noted, whilst front-end recycling has reduced, this is not the whole story. In 2020-2021, only 0.14% of the waste sent to the facility was landfilled, and the BMW sent to landfill was also therefore minimal. In addition, back-end recycling is also undertaken. Whilst this can't be counted towards our recycling targets in England, as it is in other countries such as Wales and the rest of Europe, it involves further extraction of post-incineration metals. The bottom ash, which is approximately 23% of the input tonnage, is also recycled and used in the construction industry, and the fly ash is also beneficially used for neutralisation of industrial acids. So in 2020-21, of the 190,374 tonnes of contract waste that were delivered to the facility, only 0.14% or 286 tonnes were landfilled. The rest had a beneficial use, whether that be from recycling or creating energy. The facility offers a range of other benefits. It supplies up to 11 megawatts of electricity to the national grid, and the newest and most significant introduction from an environmental perspective is that it provides heat to the council's district heating network. For each megawatt of electricity, if converted to heat, the efficiency is multiplied by a factor of 5. So this really does improve the environmental performance of the plant. It provides cost-effective, environmentally friendly heat and hot water to an ever-increasing number of homes and businesses throughout the city, helping to tackle fuel poverty from some of the most deprived communities. We also have an impressive visitor centre which shows key aspects of the waste process. We host visits to schools, universities, community groups and individuals, highlighting the importance of the environmental benefits delivered by the facility. This also helps to provide the council's key messages on recycling as well. The contract management team is supported by DEFRA in all aspects of contract monitoring and change. There are dedicated monthly meetings with an appointed transactor, and they host quarterly networking meetings for all council PFI contract management teams, and periodically offer waste-specific contract management training. The facility and contract have fundamentally changed the way that Leeds City Council deals with residual waste. It provides a modern, safe, efficient facility for the collection service. It's improved our environmental performance as a whole, saving approximately 40,000 tonnes of carbon per year when compared to landfill, which is the equivalent of taking 19,500 cars off the road. It generates up to 11 megawatts of electricity, which is enough to power 22,000 homes, and now provides heat to the district heating network, which adds further carbon benefits. Finally, the forecast saving for the contract at the start of the contract was expected to be approximately £7 million over the life of the contract per annum when compared to the previous solutions. I'll now hand you over to Ed. We'll talk about.
Right. So around 26 RCV vehicles are tipped per day, roughly equating to 41,000 tonnes yearly. HW Martins operate a state-of-the-art material recycling facility, Parkside Lane in Leeds. I'm pressing on that one. So the contract was originally let in 2013. The current contract ends November 2023. We extended the contract this time using the Public Contracts Regulation 72. The premise being it's currently unclear on the requirements of the council arising from the Environment Bill. It's unknown the potential effects from the deposit return scheme and extended producer responsibility, and also funding opportunities from the government. So there's a pricing mechanism within the contract. It consists of a processing cost. It's charged per tonne for all the mixed material delivered. And the council is guaranteed to receive at least market rate for these materials. Any material sales above market value is split 50-50 between the council and HW Martin. The cost and the income is offset against each other and either generates a cost or income to the council depending on the strength of the markets. So due to the volatile and international nature of the recyclable material market, it's heavily reliant on factors such as demand, packaging recovery notes, capacity, oil virgin material prices, transport costs, international tariffs, all affect these material prices. So the mechanism is currently providing a net income to the council, and we're currently 300,000 under year-to-date budget for the service. So this is a list of. Oh yes, thank you. This is a list of material types that we currently collect, and it also tells you what happens to that material and where it goes. So as you can see, we introduced plastic food trays back in 2019, and also Tetra Packs in 2019. HW Martins also separates things that aren't advertised, such as scrap metal, textiles, and rigid plastics.
The process at Martins itself, it's a series of separate processes that take out individual materials. I won't go through them in too much detail, but they include things like the trommel, a magnet, an eddy current, and 2 picking cabins. This is the main picking cabin, and it shows you how important the workforce are at Martins, because they there's 2 conveyor belts going through there. There's paper on one conveyor, so the staff there are picking out anything that's not paper. On the other conveyor belt, there's a mixture of materials, so they're picking out bottles, waste, aluminium cans, and then the mixed paper continues through the cabin. And that picture just shows you the quality of the paper that comes out of the process. And then we've got baled materials, so they're ready to be sent onwards. Any waste material from the process is sent for refuse-derived fuel, which is useful in energy from waste facilities. In terms of the actual contract, Martins report monthly to us about the figures, and that helps us to understand the tonnes and the pricing and the performance of our green bin material. And then because of the importance to the council of the contract, it's very carefully monitored and managed by our team. And we work closely with Martins to understand all aspects of the contract. So that's from, looking forward to the markets and, what might happen in the future, to basic day-to-day operational issues that may affect our staff. Martins are also audited by our team on a 6-monthly basis through due diligence audits. So they'll also audit their own contractors, and then we audit Martins. And that's to ensure compliance both with the contract and with legislation. So it is very carefully monitored.
Thank you very much. I don't know if HW Martins want to make any comments at this point.
Morning. If I'll briefly just, I won't waste everybody's time. Just very briefly, HW Martin is part of the Martin Group of companies, which was established in 1976. Myself and one of the directors established HW Martin Waste, which is not a great name, but we're all about recyclables basically, in 1999. Our clients are largely 99% local authorities. And if I describe what we do, we extract value, recyclable material from waste. We do that in 2 main forms. We manage household waste recycling centres, which we do for 8 local authorities. And we manage through 2 MRFs, material recycling facilities, one based in Leeds and one based in Derbyshire, over 200,000 tonnes annually for 13 local authorities. That's very, very briefly what HW Martin does. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if Veolia want to try and speak again.
Hi, hopefully everyone can hear you. I'll try and introduce myself.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Right. So sorry about that earlier. I put an external speaker on the computer. It's Donald McPhail here. I am the Chief Operating Officer for Veolia UK's treatment business. I look after all the PFI contracts. And I'm with Scott Francis, who's the area manager.
Yeah, morning, Scott Francis. I'm the head of operations, so I look after Veolia's energy recovery facilities in the north of the UK.
I think we'd like to say that we're particularly probably proud of the site at Leeds. It's been a challenge. When we signed the contract, some of the sorting materials was tricky. We tried and overcome ways of doing it, but just expanding on the point that Amanda made, the market changed as well. So some of the materials we were pulling out for potential recycling, and unlike the Martins plant, we were taking residual waste and trying to get recyclates out. The Martin plant is obviously doing recyclates that's put out specifically for recycling. So the material we're looking at is what's in your black bin bag. So we're comfortable we can get over 2% recycling, but the aim was obviously get higher. But you may have read in the press that lower grade recyclates that you pull out is very restrictive of who will take it now, compared to maybe when the contract was signed, there was a wider range of markets. Even leaving the UK is difficult and tricky now. So despite further investment in capital and different processes, the quality just wasn't good enough to get to a final end user who wanted to reuse the material, which is the key purpose of recycling. Other than that, I think the rest of the ERF is very successful, and we're very positive about the rest. But we're open to looking at other ideas as time goes on, of course.
Thank you very much. Polly, do you want to comment on anything around the carbon impact of our strategy?
Not specifically. I suppose one thing just for a government level is the fact that we measure how we're performing on tonnage, and that is really contradictory to the carbon impact. And just to give you an example, if we look at what we do on textiles, let me just have a look at my figures. So textiles make up 3% of our black bin, but would make up 30% of the carbon. And so I know we're going to be driven by what the government strategy says, but I think it's interesting to keep coming back to that, and especially when we're talking at a national level, to actually understand what the carbon impact is and where we're really focusing our attention. And that goes through lots of, I've just pulled that out as one of the really kind of clear examples, but that is true across a lot of the things that we're doing. And also that focus on reuse and what we've seen people like Zero Waste Leeds doing across the city. If you compare the carbon impact of actually reusing a material, again, just looking at the figure, you go with textiles, if we recycle it, we save 6,000 kilograms of carbon. If we were to reuse it, we save 21,000 kilograms. So it's just, I think it's really important to keep coming back to those figures and the relative impact. So I'm happy to sort of answer specific questions. I've got a list of different materials and things if people have questions. So
thank you. It'd be good if you could circulate that list to the Rob afterwards for the whole board. I think whilst clearly we have to do meet government requirements, we should still be driven, given our climate emergency, on the carbon impact. John, do you want to comment at all at this stage, or?
Not particularly, Chair, but just to pick up on Polly's point there, that's really where we want to work closely together and looking at what we do in the future, trying to strike that balance between what the government's going to require of us legally, because that's obviously going to be a massive driver for us. We've got a legal commitment in the future, perhaps to collect food or glass and/or glass. But as Polly says, some of the other materials perhaps we don't focus on as much now, such as textiles. We need to be looking at solutions for those, but it's how we afford to do that and how we do those.
Thank you. And Councillor Afik, do you want to comment at this stage, or do you want to come in later on?
I think I'll come in later on, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Afik. Okay, so unless I've missed anyone, I'll open it up for questions. I can't see anyone indicating straight away, so I'll start on my questions. So the first question is about HW Martin, and you said that we get when prices are above market rate, we split it 50-50. I don't really understand how anything can be above market rate, because surely market rate is defined by what the market will pay for it. So just a question on, do you mean there's a fixed number, and if it's above a fixed number, we split the extra amount?
The mechanism which is quite common, which was something that was established with Leeds and HW Martin at the beginning of this arrangement in 2013, is something that's been adopted throughout the country. So I've actually seen my own mechanisms come back to me in lots of different guises today. When we talk about the mid value, each month there are two industry publications which are commonly used, one called Materials Recycling Weekly and one called Let's Recycle. Those journals have the sales figures across the country for the various grades of material. So what we, through this mechanism, we guarantee the midpoint of those prices, and any uplift or anything we sell above that, we share equally with the council. The important thing to note is that regardless of whatever we do, we will always pay out that midpoint value. And we also demonstrate within that mechanism what via our own sales invoices, each and every individual price.
Thank you very much. And just while you're talking, I'd like to know a bit more about the glass being in the same containers, because I think you'll be aware that other authorities put glass with their general recycling and we don't. And I'd be really interested in your take on that and how that would affect other recycling that you do.
Without going too much into the different processes, across the two locations that we've got, we deal with every permutation of material that is collected at the curb in the country. Some of the material grades are what we call a containers mix, which are glass cans and plastics. They're relatively inexpensive to process, and I won't go through each one, but there are reasons and whys different councils do what they do at the curb.
If you just wait a minute, there's usually a test at this time, so when it stops, you can carry on again. There we go. Okay, handing back over.
The most the broadest mix is a full mix that we call with glass. So it's basically just about everything you could put in the container at the curb and then present it to a facility. We have our own glass plant, so we extract glass ourselves. At Leeds, we don't currently take that into the mix. And it's something that we've spoken to Leeds a few times about. And it is something we could talk to the councils again about. It will increase the cost of processing. And what you tend to find is if you include glass products in the full mix, you devalue some of the other grades of material, being the fibrous grades. So there are different grades of fibre, being what we call OKLS, which is cardboard, mixed paper, different grades of mixed papers, news and PAMs. They're all a variety of paper. The degradation of that isn't the fines, which is a lot of problems for other operators. It's we're very good at getting the glass fines out of the mix. It's the fact that you get moisture and food, which what that invariably means is when you include glass, you tend to get more contamination on material that would otherwise be recovered, and we can do that. And John or Ed may want to talk about the fact we've discussed this and we've looked at it previously. Some of the issues historically been on the fact that the extended periods have meant that the level of investment is something that we have to look at. But it is an option that we are quite happy to discuss again.
Thank you. I don't know if you've looked at this in terms of the carbon impact, in terms of, because my assumption is if we did it curbside, we'd recycle more glass in Leeds. We may or may not, depending on a number of factors. I guess, does the carbon impact reduce if you have extra glass in the mix? Or maybe I ask Polly, I don't know.
You might be stretching my level of knowledge on that one. I know what the carbon impact is if we manage to recycle glass, not specifically if you're taking it in as like mixed up with other materials as opposed to independently collected. So I couldn't answer that.
I'm going to bring in Councillor Hartbrook. I assume it's on this point, Councillor.
For the authorities where you do recycle glass, obviously you've got mixed colours in there. Does the sorting, because I know that glass is valued, obviously clear glass commands a much bigger premium than brown or green glass. Does your facility enable you to sort of do optical sorting to filter that out?
We don't currently, no. I mean, I think it's worth just mentioning two things. Leeds, to the best of my knowledge, has got one of the broadest range of bring bank locations in the country for the reception of glass. I've looked at some of the tonnages with some of the officers myself, and I've looked at some of our other contracts of what is recovered or what you'd expect to recover in addition to what's presently done. And as a city, you're doing very well at recovering a large amount of glass. As soon as you put glass with other mixed materials, you handle that glass more frequently. Each time you handle the glass, it breaks up into more fragments. If it's above a certain size, it can be colour sorted quite easily. And I won't bore you with the technology, but the more frequently it's handled, the finer it gets, and the opportunity to colour sort makes it more difficult as well. So I think it would be an interesting piece of work to look at if you included that within your own container at the curb at the moment, actually how much better that would be than what you're currently doing, excluding the fact that there are costs there to collect it in the bring banks.
I just would there be because obviously different houses create different colours of glass. Do you think possibly there might be an argument for doing a co-mingled collection of brown and green glass, but then retaining a centrally deposited point of a separate clear glass? Is that something that you think could potentially be an option?
It's possible, and I get the point that you're looking at the values of the material. I would personally have the full mix available. If it was something we're going to do still in bring banks, I would keep the full range because of the economics and the carbon footprint of fetching those material types. And people are less likely, I think, to go to a location to deposit one type of glass. I think they like, generally speaking, we like recycling to be easy, and I think that's a key thing. A lot of what we do, and I think is what we missed in media reporting, that it does come back to the public and what they present.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to bring in Councillor Carlile.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a selection of questions on different topics. Do you want me to break them up or just fire away everything?
Break them up and then we'll get answers as we go along.
Thank you. A couple of questions then about the RRF first. Just around first how that 2% target was set, because obviously last year it was achieved at 2.3%. Obviously there's a balance to be set by setting a target that gets the most out of the contract whilst also being achievable and a useful target. So I'd just like to understand how that 2% was set out and whether we were seeking to set the best possible target for reuse of those materials. The second question on the RRF is around the capacity. So at the moment, are we as a city council the only people using that for waste? And how far do we get in terms of the capacity of the waste it could handle? And therefore, have we looked at whether that service could be available to others or shared across different authorities, etc.? So that's my questions on the RRF first, if that's all right.
Thank you.
Hello. In terms of the capacity, this last 12 months or 18 months, really, we've seen a huge increase in residual waste throughout the pandemic. And last year, that figure I quoted, the 190,000 that we delivered, was pretty much, there's different capacities at the RRF. And Scott, if you want to jump in, please do. But the actual facility can accept 214,000 tonnes under its permit, but it can't process that amount of waste. They have actually, in the last 12 months, increased the permit of the ERF facility to 189,950, is it, Scott?
That's correct, yeah.
Which, you know, we had to do that because of our tonnage was so high during that first year of the pandemic. And obviously, that what you can accept at the front end, you know, you have to take out elements of that to be able to process. So, I mean, in theory, Veolia could take 214,000 and send some out for processing elsewhere. So that's the sort of capacity of the burner now and the main facility. In terms of the 2%, I think when we were looking to renegotiate that target, we were looking really at what materials we could find sustainable markets for, and it was metals and the makeup of the composition of the waste and the efficiency of the machinery. The 2% target was set on that basis that it would be achievable, because we didn't want to continually end up in the position where we were having to revisit the target again. And as the recycling performance has shown this last year, we've achieved over that this year. 2.3%, I think, was quoted on the slide. So it's at that level. Obviously, also there is still some metals in the material that are extracted at the back end, and whilst they're not counted towards our recycling targets, they are recycled and they go for beneficial use elsewhere. I don't know if you've got anything to add, Scott.
Is it worth just mentioning about the capacity? There's obviously a rate per hour that we can burn material on, but the availability is higher than maybe was originally anticipated, and because of that, that's why we have a higher theoretical overall capacity. That would be the one point I would make. I think the other one is that the Leeds get priority in terms of the tonnage that comes to the site at the moment. So there is other waste comes in to the site as top-up tonnage. Not so much last year because there's been more municipal waste produced with people being at home, but in previous years, some smaller risings of waste from the city of Leeds comes in from third parties.
Thank you. Quick one back on that then. You said that 2% target was temporary, and is that for 7 years, did you say? At the end of that, will you be looking at the whole target again to see whether there's a fuller achievement that we can get out of other materials again, or purely just looking at the metals again?
There's an option at that point. We could either reinstate the facility as it was and revisit the 10% target, or we can keep it as it is and continue on the 2%. And that's obviously a discussion we need to have at that point in time.
Thank you. I've got a few, I guess, that are based on just understanding the overall strategy and where we go with the carbon impact as well as the cost. So those examples probably be really useful, because I really like examples like that of where there's something that maybe has been missed that could have a huge impact that people generally aren't aware of. First, I'm aware when we're looking at waste, there's a balance on how much we ask people to separate it. So at the moment, we do the one green bin as opposed to many others. And I think that's based on a balance of how much we think can be reused. I wonder if somebody can just elaborate on the thinking around the one green bin rather than separating into different ones. That's one question on that. I'm always quite interested in plastics in the green bin as well, because the fact that the fact I've heard, but I'm not entirely sure which ones, is that actually some of the plastics that you could put in are better to recover as energy rather than reuse. And I just wonder whether there's any of that consideration is taken into what we put in the single green bin rather than others. Because obviously if we've got the RERF as an option, which some other local authorities won't have, then there may be some materials that are much better to put in, get out of the chain. You're not creating new plastic to create a tub with it and then remove it entirely. And I just wondered whether there's some thoughts over those, because I think sometimes for people putting the material in their bin, they're quite often thinking, why am I not putting this in the recycling bin because it's some type of plastic? But actually that might not be the I guess carbon efficiency is what I'm thinking of mainly there, really the most carbon efficient way to do. And then you touched on, Polly, really the main aim of where we have to get to, which is the reduce, reuse and recycle. Obviously what we're looking at here is the end of the waste strategy, what we deal with what's left. And I just wondered, what's our work in terms of trying to reduce the amount that ever gets into a bin in the first place, because that's probably the main aim of where we're trying to get to, and just what the council's doing around that. Thank you.
John, yep.
Yeah, Chair, if I try and pick up most of those points, and if any other colleagues want to add to what I say, please do. Focusing mainly on the main part of the questions around the green bin and why we currently have the one single bin and the logic for that. I think the first point I'd make is we really, I suppose I would argue, we have two bins. We have the brown bin and the green bin in terms of the recyclable material we collect in Leeds. And although we're not really talking about the brown bin much today, I don't think, we need to recognise the fact that does count towards Leeds' recycling targets, and that's how we've been measured. And the targets the government has set over the last few years have included the garden waste. So Leeds had made a decision a few years ago to invest in a garden bin service, collection service, and has continued that investment. And currently Leeds is the largest collection of garden waste in the United Kingdom in terms of the number of households we offer to it to. And one of the main reasons for that is we continue to make it free. So we've invested in that service over a number of years. And of course, when you invest in a service like that and you forgo the income there, it restricts you to a degree on the other options that you might be able to bring forward. So that decision was made a number of years ago in terms of that investment, and the green bin was seen as the way forward for recycling in Leeds. I think the point I'd make is that in terms of, I think it's been said a couple of times already, that the green bin in Leeds does take a huge range of materials, and as HW Martin's commented on, the number of materials has increased in the last couple of years, particularly in terms of the plastics, the pot stubs and trays that we take in the green bin. So really, in terms of the three items that aren't in the green bin in Leeds, it comes down to food, glass, and as Polly's highlighted as well, textiles. They're the three main types of waste that we don't put in the green bin that you may find in some of the councils. And again, as HW Martins have highlighted, that can be through a complexity of ways. It's not just a simple case of they have an additional bin to take those materials. There are a wide variety of ways that that's done. And what I think the appendix 7, the appendix number it was, sorry, that was sent out late, gives you examples of the different councils local to Leeds and also to the core cities. And you can see from that the types of different solutions that are offered by different councils. And that is one of the main thrusts of the resource waste strategy that the government set out 2 or 3 years ago to look at the consistency of collection across councils. So that's one of the reasons we're waiting really to understand better from government what that means in terms of practicalities, what a consistency of collection means. The resource waste strategy is really clear in that its ambition is to focus on food and glass in that respect. And we're waiting for the consultation on that to come back. We're told early in 2022 around some more detail on that. But in the recent budget, there was an announcement that more certainty around some of the funding that will be available nationally in terms of food. So that's clearly to us the direction of travel government to focus on initially. So that's kind of the background really. So and when we have consulted and spoken to the Environmental Scrutiny Board in the past 2 or 3 years ago, we presented some work that UNOMI had done, a consultancy that we'd employed through RAP, which is again an environmental consultancy the government use, and they looked at various different options and models that could be applied in a city like Leeds. So I think there was about 15 or so different models of collection with different permutations of bins, and all of them really at the end of the day, if we wanted to include food and glass, then you were looking at an extra bin of some description, whether that meant another green bin, probably coloured blue or another colour that would then separate out the recyclable waste into what we probably call the fabrics, the softer stuff and the harder stuff, the plastics, glass, etc., to deal with some of the issues that's been raised around cross-contamination. Whatever it would be, it would mean another bin on top of the green bin and the brown bin and the black bin. And there was certainly a feeling that we got at the time, this is we're talking about 3 or 4 years ago, I think, when we consulted and around that, and there was the feeling we certainly got from members was there wasn't an appetite at that time for an extra bin. But they're the options that we continue to look at. We set out in our own waste strategy that the reason we are waiting is because that we need to understand from the government, as all councils do, what the resource waste strategy will require legally of us. And glass is a classic case of that. The resource waste strategy both sets out that the ambition that glass will become a legal requirement to collect from the curbside, but also talks about introducing a deposit return scheme for the country, quoting sort of similar successes on the continent and other places. But we need some clarity on that, because if the deposit return scheme was rolled out nationally that was successful, then, which is basically a little bit like the old 20p, whatever value would attach to a bottle that could be then redeemed by customers, then arguably that would render the collection of glass at the curbside pointless, and certainly not necessary. So we do need some clarity on that, deciding on the best way forward. Therefore, if we are legally required to collect glass, how we collect it. Is it better in a separate bin? Is it better collected actually separately as glass? So that's the history, if you like. That I hope is helpful. What's the final point, Councillor?
I think that it's more the one around whether there were materials that are better to recover as energy rather than being in the green bin. So I guess that's more to Polly and yourself, and then what we're focusing around the reduce, reuse, recycle elements of it. So trying to get it out of the stream in the first place.
Yeah, I'll answer the last one first, and then if anyone else can chip in with the energy answer, please do. Yeah, but we've worked over a number of years now at trying to promote the reuse and reduce agenda, particularly, as well as obviously deliver a service to the customers of Leeds through the curbside. So examples of that, we've worked really closely. Polly's mentioned that Zero Waste Leeds, for example, a third sector organisation, to work looking at how campaigns and other reuse and reuse initiatives can be supported. So, for example, there's a really successful school uniform reuse campaign and underway at the moment in Leeds, which has worked really well in the last year, supported by Zero Waste Leeds and others. And that's worked really well. And that picks up on Polly's point around fabrics and textiles, particularly. We support a number of reuse organisations collecting furniture across the city, and I've done for a number of years, and that's worked really successfully, complementing our own bulky collection service. And that furniture has been reused, including in some of the most needy households and circumstances across the city. We also work with a charity to operate to revive shops in our Kirkstall and Seacroft household waste sites, where second-hand and reused furniture and other materials items are sold, and we have what in effect is a profit share arrangement with those charities to help gain the council some income, but also to support those charities work across the city. So there's some examples of the work we do around reuse, but what would be interesting to see, and again I think there's various two different thoughts on this, is if food is introduced as a way to collect across the city separately, then will that drive down waste of food? So there are examples that are quoted nationally around, by introducing separate food collection, that does change behaviours, almost a shaming factor, I suppose, and people being more aware of the waste that they're producing because they're actually separating it out and putting in a different bin. So, but equally, there are arguments to say, well, actually, it can increase the people's waste because they feel they're doing some good, and it doesn't matter so much there's so much waste because it's going somewhere that's more directly then recycled as such. So again, that's an area I think we particularly want to focus on in the future around food waste in particular, and as Polly mentions, textiles. I think they're the two key areas of waste for us that we need to focus on as a city solution. I'll finish there. I don't know if anyone has any answers.
Polly.
I'll do the generic answer, and Philip might be able to be more specific. So if you look at the RAP study, they talk about incineration, CHP, which is the energy from waste with district heating, saving 30 kilograms CO2 equivalent. What that won't take into account is the calorific value of each different material. So where you will have heard, so plastics will burn at a high temperature and produce more energy versus more wet materials like food. So that's probably where that's come from. What I haven't got is that figure broken down, which I don't know. There we go, over to Phil. Can I just say on two other points though? So on the glass, I think it's really important that we push really hard with government about the 20p scheme, because the difference is about 4.5 times between recycling versus reuse. So we should be really pushing for that as a city. And also, just to say, in terms of the reduce reuse, we also have our Leeds by Example website, and one of the messages we use in a lot of our events, our Green Jobs and Skills, our food event, is about food waste. We're a country, it'd be the third country in terms of emissions. So actually getting people to take responsibility for what they're doing, working with people like FareShare, who actually reuse that food and get it to the right people. That's all, we see them as a food poverty charity, but actually they're really contributing from a carbon point of view. So there's lots of initiatives happening. There's also a lot of work going on with the fashion industry, with the Leeds University, looking at how we make fashion more of a responsible industry. And actually there will be something hopefully coming to the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee about that, and about the circular economy around fashion, to start focusing on that as a city. Phil.
Just to quickly add to what Polly said, specifically in terms of what is better to be incinerated or recycled, in terms of what's in the green bins or black bins. I suppose it comes down to 2 points: what the value of the material is and what the environmental impact, or specifically the carbon impact of that material in terms of recycling or incinerating. And as Polly mentioned, there is generic information out there in terms of the incineration impact, carbon impact of materials, of generic incinerators with CHP. Obviously, we've got our own specific incinerator with its own technical parameters. And we are starting a piece of work with a consultancy at the minute, which is looking at our specific technical parameters, and we should be able to have some information soon over the next few months, which will specifically say the carbon impact of removing a certain material from the black bin to the green bin, and looking at the specific detailed information for our waste streams.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, I don't want to monopolize that. That's really useful. Thank you. Because I think that would be really useful information when you're looking at it. Because I think there's a lot around, obviously, Polly mentioned glass there, and that's a really important one because it is, even if you're recycling glass, it's a high carbon intensive process to make it into another bottle. You're much better reusing the bottle. And in fact, you're probably much better from a carbon point of view buying something not in glass than you are in others. So if you can get something in a Tetra Pak, that might in fact be better than glass. Even though you can recycle a whole bottle, it does take a lot of energy to make it into a new one. And the Revive shops are really good because, yeah, one person's waste could be another person's treasure in a way. The one last thought that I've got, and I don't know whether it's something that we can look into around that, Chair, is when you go to the supermarket and you get your various bits home, you'll find that some yogurt pots, for instance, will be recyclable and some just aren't. Not that they're not types that we recycle in Leeds necessarily, because I think we do quite a lot of the plastic types, but there seems to be no real onus on producers to ensure that their item is recyclable. And maybe somebody can add on that, because yeah, you can get two different types of margarine or spread and find one is in a tub that's recyclable and one says not yet recycled, which is seeming to be a point in the future where we might recycle these, but I don't know why we're just not creating it all as recyclable material at first if it's there. And that's me done, Chair. Thank you. Apologies for monopolising the meeting somewhat.
No, that's helpful, Councillor Carlo. I understand Councillor Hartbrook, he works for large supermarkets. He might be able to comment on that specific point.
So yeah, in my day job, I'm working to reduce the amount of plastic that goes into the environment and make what does go into the environment more recyclable. So my background is food manufacturing and more latterly retail. The push, in order to answer your question directly, is it better to burn plastic than to recycle it? Absolutely not, if it can be recycled. From a energy recovery facility perspective, they love plastics because they're very calorific dense and they really help burn temperature. So incinerators love to get plastics in. However, from a complete carbon life cycle perspective, burning something that could also be remade into something else is the bottom of the food chain in terms of the options that we should be going for. All food manufacturers, and you're right to sample out some of the yogurt manufacturers, which I won't name on this because it's public, but some of them are in a bit of a corner when it comes to recycling, because the yogurts typically use a lot of polystyrene, which is one of the plastics that isn't recycled. Most food manufacturers at the moment are working to go to what's called recycle ready specifications, which basically means within any one piece of plastic that goes in your bin, it's pretty much one type of plastic that can either go down the polypropylene stream or the polythene stream or basically the Coke bottle stream. That's the kind of direction of travel that all manufacturers are working in, so that instead of some of the mixed types of plastic that end up in the bin, it'll be more clear that actually that can go in that, and then the more increasingly automated sorting processes that exist can separate it out, whether that be near infrared or physical in some cases. I suppose the question that I had, because again the direction is really clear, is that wet food waste is bad to go into incinerators generally because it's heavy, and before you can incinerate it, you've got to drive a hole of moisture. So the amount of residual energy recovered from food waste going into an incinerator probably isn't great. Plus you're missing out on the opportunity to generate biogas from it, which could then further go into the heating, to generate heat and electricity and so on and so forth. I've got lots of other questions in terms of that, but just to answer your specific question there, no, recycling where you can is always the best option after you've done reduce and reuse.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hartbrook. I'll come back to you for your questions. I'm just going to bring in the other people who came in first. That's really helpful. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, Councillor McKenna.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I think most of my questions have been dealt with, but I have one or two. Thanks to John, I was going to raise food waste, and glass obviously has been exhausted around the table. And it's certainly useful to know the direction of travel from John. But I notice that we're one of the 2 local authorities that don't charge for waste, and I think that's a cause to be celebrated. Maybe it's a question to you, James. Is that likely to change in the budget, given how tight it is in the next few years? And finally, just another question. It's straightforward. I'll get out of the way. Sorry for putting you on your spot, but that's what you're here for. The other thing I've noticed, polystyrene was mentioned on yogurt pots. And I noticed Wakefield seemed to deal with it and recycle polystyrene. If you're like me, then your partner has daily deliveries of Amazon, and it comes with huge amounts of packaging, lots of polystyrene. She actually started knitting during the lockdown. She's become quite good at it. And sometimes we get one ball of wool, and you just would not believe the packages like that, you know. But as I say, there's an awful lot of polystyrene that, and quite frankly, I don't know what to do with it. It seems a waste putting it in the black bin. You know, and if you get a new washing machine or a new television or anything, you'll all know what the problem is. But if one authority can deal with it, it seems to me that it's something that we should probably be finding a way to resolve. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll deal with the first question. There are no plans to introduce charging, and it's not just a financial issue. If you look at those authorities where they have introduced charging, they collect significantly less of that waste because people opt out of paying for it. So at the present time, we've got no plans to go down that route.
Thank you. I don't know who can respond to the other question.
Regarding polystyrene, yeah, it's something that we're actually looking into. It wouldn't be really possible to put it in the green bin because we compact everything, and it'll just explode everywhere. But we are looking into offering it at the HWRCs. We're currently looking at a business case to offer that. So,
could you just explain for people who are watching what HWRC
oh, sorry,
is?
Household Waste Recycling Centre. Sorry.
Thank you. HW Mann, do you want to comment on that at all?
I think the point is it's similar to what we were talking about before. If it goes in the wheeler bin and goes into a refuse collection vehicle, the likelihood by the time it reaches a facility, it's no longer one piece. It's a multitude of pieces, which basically it's not unique to us, will really struggle to recover that.
Thank you very much. Councillor McKenna, do you want to go back?
Tiny little one there, Chair. I mean, Wakefield do seem to have solved the problem. It's not a million miles away from here, Wakefield, isn't it? And maybe if we go and have a look how they're dealing with it, we could save an awful lot of expense. It's not like reinvented the wheel, is it? They're practicing and doing it. So clearly they're managing it and they're overcoming all the problems that you've mentioned. So it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that we can emulate what they're doing and do it very quickly.
Okay, now, do you want to come on this specific point, Councillor Harper? Okay.
Just a very quick point. I mean, when we talk about polystyrene, there's expanded polystyrene, which is what you're basically packing materials that you're talking about. And I think, yeah, sort of either black bin or household waste recovery does make sense there. There is also quite a reasonable amount of polystyrene that is used predominantly in things like yogurt pots and margarine tubs. From what I know of the manufacturers that use that type of material, there are very good technical reasons why they feel they need to use it at the moment. But I know a lot of work is going on in industry to move away from those. So I think what we will see in general terms is a simplified set of plastics that are produced by the likes of companies I've worked for historically, to basically make sure that there are more clear streams that can go there, that can go there, that can go there. Whereas at the moment, a lot of progress has been made, but you've still got a lot of materials which are neither that nor that, which therefore mean they end up going to incineration.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I can't see anyone else wants to comment on this question. So I'm going to bring in Councillor Wadsworth.
Why don't we advertise everything that Martins can recycle is my first question. Because I come back to my analogy of the pan. I had this argument with a war colleague of mine only a few weeks ago when her husband had put the pan in the black bin and she removed it out of the black bin and put it in the green bin. And he said, it's gone in the wrong bin. In fact, he rang me up to ask me which bin it should go in. And I said, well, you know, I would put it in the green bin, but actually Martins don't advertise that they take scrap metal, but you clearly said you do take scrap metal. And secondly, how much glass is in the black bin currently going to the RERF? Because that is the amount that you would expect to be able to recover through a curbside collection. And thirdly, just a comment regarding charges. We are not a non-charging authority, are we? Because we do charge at our household waste centres.
So to answer your first point, volumes of those materials such as scrap, textiles and mixed rigid plastics would cause a problem for the process. And so, yeah, it wouldn't be feasible to collect them in such volumes. I don't know if you want to jump in, Deck.
Yeah, John.
Perhaps if I can just also help there as well, and then if somebody might has anything to add. I think the general point, Councillor Wadsworth, around why we don't was the question about do we advertise, do we tell people what can go in the green bin? So we do a lot of work around that in terms of the basic materials that can go in the green bin. So, for example, in a couple of weeks' time, the annual leaflet will go out to all households telling them about the Christmas collections, and on the back of that will be another easy to sort of look at pictorial version of what goes in the green bin, which we did last year. And all that information is also regularly shared on social media. And again, we use partners such as Zero Waste Leeds to champion that with organisations. We can never do it enough, so we'll always want to do more and more on what goes in the green bin. But I think the point what Council was about the sort of the more niche sort of stuff, like you say, the pans and stuff, and that's what I think Ed's saying, is that there are always there are some materials that HW Martins, if it is there, they can sort and find a market for. They won't necessarily throw it away, but what we can't do for some materials is advertise that to the general public, because the scale of which then that would then be presented would mean that they couldn't then sort it and find a market for it. So I think that's the case with some of the items that you're mentioning. If we suddenly said to everybody you could put all your old pots and pans and things and whatever in your green bin, then we might struggle to process that at the other end. So there are things, and textiles is an example of that HW Martins do extract some textiles that are put in the green bin and find a market for those. But if we said to people, you can put textiles in your green bin, the amount of textiles and clothes that we would then get would be too difficult to manage, both from a viewpoint of us collecting it, but also the machinery in the current way that HW Martins sorts things. So what we try and do is focus on the main things that can go in the green bin and make that clear to everybody. Our website, council website, also does detail in quite detail the things that can go in the green bin, and has a search facility on there. But perhaps I don't know if you want to comment on at all on that.
Yeah, I think you're right. We can deal with it. We do extract those sorts of materials out. I think there's another point as well, that if you do advertise textiles and the metals, you've got very good facilities within Leeds already to collect those at the household waste recycling sites. You advertise that, and they are big components that you're putting into your green bin. You're putting those into your green bin. There's less capacity then for the other types of materials that we do readily recycle, i.e. the plastics, the papers, and the cardboard, and the glass, the cans. So I think, like I say, you've got a bit of a conundrum there, a bit of a balance as to what you actually do advertise, put into your bin, and capacity-wise.
Thank you. I think you also asked about the glass in the black bin. Yep.
I can answer that. Based on our last composition analysis, and based on the tonnes we delivered to the incinerator last year, which were about 190,000 tonnes, composition analysis shows that glass was about 7.4% of that, which equates to about 14,000 tonnes. per year?
John?
So I felt just worth expanding from Vio's perspective. We of course recycle the aggregate from the ref process. So the glass content will survive the combustion process and will be part of the aggregate that goes for road manufacture, different products. I'm not saying that's the best way of treating it, but it is, at least it's been reused somewhere along the line.
Thank you. And I think John wants to comment. Thanks for that, Scott. That's helpful.
Sorry, Chair, just to quickly pick on the point that Phil just made. The analysis, the composition analysis that Phil refers to is quite old. I think it's 2015 that we last did that. So they're the figures, and I presume the figures that Polly's picked up on as well. So we are doing a more recent composition analysis that we're looking to do after Christmas with an environmental consultancy that specialises in this type of work. So probably in about February time, we'll be doing a further detailed composition analysis, what is in the black bins, and we'll be able to share that with Scrutiny when we have that information early next year.
Thank you. I'll be interested in that. The point about charging, I think we'll take that as a comment rather than a specific question. I understand your point around the household waste sorting sites, Councillor Wadsworth. Is that okay? Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, next is Councillor Hart-Brooke.
Probably a question for Amanda or Philip. Obviously, the direction of travel as a city that we'll be moving in will be recycling more. You know, at the moment, our recycling rate is 35%, which is quite a lot below the national average. And not, you know, I know not much of it's going to landfill. That's very laudable, but the level of which we are recycling will improve. Some of that through government funding, some of that through legislation, etc., etc. My question is, obviously, we have a contract with Veolia for a level of service. If we start diverting materials such as food waste, such as more readily recyclable plastics through education and the stuff that food, manufacturers are doing to make it more recyclable, are there any sort of contractual risks there in terms of us not filling up their facility to the level that we'd agreed?
We've tried to make the contract as flexible as possible. So we have what we call a guaranteed minimum tonnage. Now, we don't actually have to deliver that tonnage, but we would have to pay for it. And we set that deliberately at a relatively low level, but I don't think we have any concerns that we would ever get to that, despite, all the new initiatives that are going to be coming forwards. So, I mean, at this moment in time, as we said last year, we were really high. So at the minute, we're sort of over delivering. But I think we're set at a level that we're fairly comfortable. Just, of all the initiatives coming forward, that wouldn't be a risk.
So building on that from a strategic level then, so we can basically divert and recycle more without any particular fear of contractual risks there. So therefore, the direction that, if you look at the government's October 2021 net zero strategy, where there's 295 million going in to pay for food waste collections in councils, and the extended producer responsibility taxes, which, let's face it, we don't know how much is going to come our way, but let's assume that some is. Is it fair to say that we as a city, we can start to think, well, actually, if we are bringing in food waste collections, what will that look like? And if we are expanding our recycling, how does that look? Do we think we need to wait for the government to sort of say, here's the amount of cash that you're getting, or can we start that planning now?
Just one point on that. Sorry, there is one thing we are still unsure about, as John keeps saying about the National Waste Strategy, is in terms of the other elements of it, like the deposit return schemes and things like that. We don't know yet how much that's going to take away from the waste streams that the council controls. In terms of taking food waste out, glass, we're comfortable with that, but in terms of other elements, we are unsure.
And I can sympathise with that, because I know there is potentially a bit of a, not a land grab, but plastic currently is very, very, very marketable, because the plastic prices have gone up 50 to 100%. So, and the expectation in terms of what levels of plastic are recycled are going up next year and going up again in 2023, and the charges for industry that doesn't do that are going to be at a level where it will drive a change in what businesses do. I think the question for the council is, if we can, we've got stuff going into our municipal waste stream that if it comes to us, is worth a value, potentially worth a value to the council. If we sort of don't commercialise it and allow it to go to others, then they will get a commercial waste stream. So ultimately, we're in a position where, as a council, we've got a receptacle there where if you're putting a valuable commodity, which currently we talk about waste, but actually it's not waste. It's materials that have had one use. And if they then go around again and can get reused, and the way that the markets are going at the moment, and let's face it, we don't know how they're going to go long term, the reusing of those could actually be a revenue stream rather than a cost. So I think that you're right in that we don't know what all the other parties are doing in terms of collecting and recycling, but I don't think it's a big leap of faith to assume that the cost of not recycling will be larger than the cost of recycling. These materials have already gone up a lot in the last 12 months. So therefore, as a city, I think we need to think, well, actually, how do we get a share of that pie?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Council. Just pick up a couple of points best I can. I just thought I couldn't leave it without a comment on the national rate of recycling. At the moment, Leeds is around 30-35%, like you said, about 35-36%, say. Obviously, that's been affected hugely by the last 18 months of the pandemic in terms of the amount of recyclable material we can collect, particularly household waste sites. So it would probably, I think it's fair to say, nearer 39% would be the average if you look at the 3 years before that. And that's reasonably comparable to the national average and certainly the average of the core cities across the country. So I think we're probably middling, is probably fair to say, I would say, on that recycling rate. But it's really good to have this conversation, share these conversations, debate here with members around all the complexities of these issues. Because what we also need to bear in mind is that it's not quite that simple, because as we've highlighted a couple of times, in Leeds, only I think certainly 0.3% or whatever it is from the black bins goes to landfill, and about 1.5% in total across the city goes to landfill. And some of the other authorities that we might be comparing high recycling rates with perhaps don't all have that high capture rate of stuff not going to landfill. Some will, and I'm not here to say that there aren't cities doing better than Leeds, but it's just it's off. This game is about trying to work out comparing apples with oranges and trying to compare apples to apples. It's really difficult, and you can understand the government from that viewpoint, looking at the resource waste strategy, trying to focus on some consistency of collection so we can compare more apples with apples. But yeah, so that's just a point I'd make. I think I couldn't really let that go without comment. And the food planning, absolutely agree in terms of that's what we're looking at the moment around the options for collecting food in Leeds, because we know we'll need to do it, we should need to do it, and that'll be in the government will be legislating that, and they said they've been really clear in the budget that there'll be money attached to that around the new burdens around that. So that there are the options we're looking at. The composition analysis of the black bin will be really good to have that information, and we'll share that with you around the food that's actually in the black bin at the moment, because that's mainly where it's going at the moment. So we're looking at what options Leeds could have, talking that through with DEFRA. We're looking at the consultation results that, again, we expect to get early next year. We're getting some initial soundings around that from them unofficially. So the options for Leeds probably would be to look at separate food waste collection service, where you collect it separately from the curbside, or looking at a co-mingling option, where the food is co-mingled with the garden waste, as happens in a number of councils already. So they're the potential options. But
sorry, just from what I've read of the government proposal, co-mingled isn't the direction, unless it's basically been worded vaguely. It said separate food. Have you heard anything that says it might actually be the co-mingled method that councils such as Manchester and Liverpool use, or is that?
Yeah, through the chair. The way the wording at the moment seems really clear in that you can't commingle and they're requiring a separate food collection. But the representation from the councils, such as you mentioned, and including Hull and East Lincolnshire, for example, East Riding, for example, who already collect commingled collections, their representation has obviously been really strong to DEFRA around that and the government around that. So we're waiting for the final guidance to be published in the new year. We expect there to be some give in that what they call the current TEEP regulations, so whether something is technically, environmentally, economically practical, allows councils currently to negotiate with DEFRA around mixing types that we currently do, and we expect there to be some flexibility around that, around the commingling of waste. Where there perhaps will be less chance of flexibility, which will be an issue for us to consider, will be whether that will be weekly or fortnightly. So that's the indications we're getting from DEFRA in our conversations, but none of that's official. And you're right, the public line at the moment is holding that line of separate curbside collection of food, but we expect there to be some compromise on that.
Thank you very much, John. Councillor Burke.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask, does the frequency of collection of green bins actually impact on the amount of recyclable material you collect? What I mean by that is, I know some areas of Leeds, where I live, for instance, it's alternative weeks. But I know my friend where she lives, then their green bins once a month and the black bins weekly. But quite often their green bin's so full, they just dump it in black bin because you've got to put it somewhere. So I just wondered if there were a net gain to be made by perhaps unifying that. And I know perhaps there's an operational issue with doing that, but just a question.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, good question. That's one of the just very briefly, it's worth just reflecting why we are where we are. When we rolled out alternate week collections, it's referred to, say, the fortnightly collection a few years ago. And there's an exercise done to look at parts of the city where it was felt that that would probably lead to more contamination rates and where it would be more difficult to introduce, and where putting more bins into the street was more difficult for people. But it was mainly around where we envisaged there being most contamination, and therefore we'd only end up with contaminated loads that would take straight to W. Martins that therefore either couldn't be sorted or rejected. But that was a number of years ago, and obviously a lot's changed in that time, both in terms of how more people are more responsible and more willing and to try better to recycle, and communities have changed in that aspect. So that's something we're looking at with the current route review, the much anticipated route review across the city, which we're about to start again now, a restart. And that's one of the key objectives of the route review. It will relook at the parts of the city that aren't on alternate week collection, and we're working closely with ward members on that across the city in all wards. So similarly, like as we did with the brown bin collection review, we'll work with ward members early on in that process, and we'll provide maps of where the current green bin collections aren't alternate week collection, and have those conversations with yourselves at a local level, with your local knowledge of where you think we could perhaps expand that now, and build and then factor that into the route review, and build alternate week collections into those communities. So that's something we will be doing, and we'll be coming out to ward members shortly on that.
Thanks, John. I'm just conscious that the route review is in the other side of this joint review, so I'm keen to keep away from that and stick to the resources and strategy element. I see it probably as operational, but it is an understandable question, Councillor Burke. Did you have another question? No. Okay. Can I ask? I've got a couple of questions. So, firstly, if we took all the food out of the incinerator, obviously that changed the composition. I'm assuming that'd make it hotter and therefore more efficient. I don't know if Veolia can comment on that, Scott.
No, the way the plant is designed is to process a certain amount of energy. So we would adjust the throughput depending on the energy content of the fuel. So you're right in assuming that actually if we take that material out, that is generally low energy material. But what we don't want is we can cope with a range of energy inputs, but conversely, we don't want the high energy input material either, like the plastics, because the process is designed to operate at the same consistent temperature. We don't want any elevated temperatures, so we would have to process less fuel to make sure we maintain operating conditions. So things like plastics, high energy, we don't want at the plant. And the other element to that is that actually things like plastics have a high acid content. we are regulated to very, very tight emission standards. So what that means is we have to use more abatement materials to get within our environmental permit if we process more high energy plastics. So we can cope with our range of energy content, and we'd adjust the process to suit to make sure that we maintain a consistent temperature profile.
It's possibly worth expanding as well to say that areas that have had separate food collection, in reality, they don't get all the food. So the impact on the overall waste mass isn't as much as you might expect from what we've seen so far. Some people just don't bother, they leave it in the residual bin, sadly.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Next question, John, probably. So we've heard the 300 million or 295 million of sort of investment with this. It feels like sounds like a big number, but actually I imagine building a whole bunch of new facilities would cost a lot more than that across the country. I don't know if you can comment on that.
Yeah, and perhaps Kevin, if he can add some sort of financial expertise as well to what I'm saying. Yeah, we're unclear at the moment. The amount of money obviously is welcomed, and the investment's welcomed, and will support the rollout of food. But what we're not absolutely clear on at the moment is how much of that is capital investment, how much is the revenue investment. We think what's been announced so far is mainly around the capital and the infrastructure investment that's needed over the next 2 or 3 years. Because one of the things we're not really supposed covered today so far in the discussion is that to support all this change, the country, never mind locally, needs a huge infrastructure change. So whether that's ADs or, sorry, I know it'll be digesters or whatever it is that the food waste, for example, will be taken to where all this new glass will be taken to processed and turned into something useful. That's an issue in itself, and presumably mainly the private sector therefore driven by the markets and what councils can provide the markets, but nevertheless a huge infrastructure investment. And I suspect the private sector is really welcoming the fact that the government have announced some money, so at least they've got a degree of certainty now about going into the market investing. So there's that bit of it as well, and then there's our own infrastructure investment. So for example, if we were to go down collecting glass separately or food separately, clearly that would require more fleet and more crews. But the fleet element of it, let's say for example we needed another 15 or 20 vehicles to do a glass only collection or a food only collection, but the current value of a vehicle, if it was electric, which we would probably all want to perhaps consider, it's about £400,000 a vehicle. So you can start to see how quickly it adds up. And that's just for Leeds, and then you've got the whole of England having to meet legal requirements potentially by 2025 and have that investment at the same time. There's the big question about whether the infrastructure is even available to be supplied on that scale. So there's loads of other questions to go through, I think, and which are good questions to have. It's good that we're having those discussions about investment and where. And the other point quickly then is that what we're still waiting for is the information around the revenue side of it. So the government's helpfully reiterated the fact that all new burdens, is the phrase that's used, will be fully funded by government. Obviously, there's a question which for government to answer, I suppose, around where they'll get the money from that, presumably through producer responsibility tax or whatever it may be called. But also for us, it's around how that money reaches us, because the devil will be in the detail around that. You know, whether that comes through as a grant, how the grant will be allocated to councils, would it be on a per household basis? How would that be worked out? How would that consider local circumstances, or would you just make an assumption of a similar rate per household across the country? So they're all boring things, but they're very important in terms of us understanding what our options are, making some key decisions now about what we do investment-wise, decision-wise, and where we take the city and consult with yourselves and residents around. I don't know if there's anything we can add to that, Kevin, into.
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, DEFRA have said that it's 295 million of capital funding, but it doesn't say that they're giving that to authorities. Equally, it doesn't say they're giving it to the private sector to build these types of facilities. So as John says, the devil's in the detail there. And then they have said they want to talk to individual authorities and consult about allocating new burdens, because each authority will be different. So the cost of us taking out, I don't know, 20, 30,000 tonnes of food waste out of the waste stream, we wouldn't send that to Veolia, and we would save that tonnage cost that we pay to Veolia. But if you compare us to another authority, they might be landfilling that equivalent tonnage, and that would be a different cost. So it's understanding what the government's position is going to be around calculating that net burdens. So we couldn't say Leeds are going to get X million now or something for quite a while, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Feek, did you want to comment?
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I think apart from funding and what John's alluded to in infrastructure, and I think one of the biggest things we need as a nation, as a country, is to have that conversation. So just to give you an example about the carrier bags. You know, if you go back a few years when we introduced the carrier bag charge, how many carrier bags ended up in the ocean, and the Sky program, you know, plastic in the ocean and all that. It raised a big, you know, kind of profile about the dangers of plastics and how people actually change our mentality of not buying a new carrier bag every time you go to, you know, it's not because of 5 pence or 10 pence. People can afford that. If you buy a bottle of milk, and do you need a carrier bag, or can you just carry it to your car, or can you take a reuse carrier bag? So, but that's actually affected the way we work and the way we think and recycle and reuse. And I think at a national level, we need that. Apart from the funding, we need that kind of conversation, that kind of campaign for people to come out, think about what goes in the green bin, what goes in the black bin, how do we actually reduce, reuse and recycle. And that is actually, I think we've probably lost a bit of focus in the last few years, and, you know, with the pandemic and everything. But I think until we have that, the new sort of strategy and government guidelines, and then a massive drive to say, well, actually the effect it has on our environment and why we need to do this. I think generally, I think we'll, you know, out in the households, we'll probably struggle until we're kind of at that point. We'll probably struggle to make that, you know, massive progress we want to make.
Thank you, Councillor Feek. I guess the question around what can we do on our own, it's got to be sitting there in the back of our mind. So we've talked about the collection bottle return scheme. You know, there's a whole bunch of things, and it'd be interesting to have a thought piece about what things we can do on our own without a national scheme. And I don't know if that'd be completely impractical or not. I don't know if you've thought about that either. John, do you?
Sorry, Jay, you mean in terms of almost a Leeds version of a deposit return scheme? Yeah, is that what you mean? No, well, the short answer is no, that's not something we've particularly given much thought to. I think on the basis really that the government itself are sort of struggling to understand the practicalities of that work at a national level with all the resources that could be brought there. Because I think for something to work, the amount of infrastructure that would be needed and cross collaboration and working across supermarkets and other producers, it's at that national level you need that to support the infrastructure that would be required. Would be my feeling on that. And again, although we want to make huge progress in Leeds, and we recognise the fact that we can still make progress, and we will make progress on and work with DEFRA around food and glass, I'd still point back to the fact we do a lot well. You know, so the glass collection in Leeds is collected really efficiently and well, and the 700 sites that we have across the city gathering at the moment around 13,000 tonnes a year of glass. It's pretty good, and we had these conversations the other week with HW Martins where we were having a session together looking at what options there are for the future, and specifically talking around glass and where that might be going. And HW Martins was saying that you know that the amount that we collect is huge, and probably is akin to a lot of other councils that are collecting it separately. And the crucial thing for us is the glass that we are getting is high quality grade glass. So again, it's trying to equate it back to which we perhaps don't do very well, and we're trying to look at the climate impacts, the carbon impact of what we collect and the grade we collect, and therefore is it being recycled more times because of the better grade glass we collect than perhaps it would if we collect it separately. So it's just really complex, but I just want to make that point that we're not doing anything. We believe that what we're doing well, and it is having good outcomes. It's just how we kick on now in the next steps and what we'll legally be required to do, and that's what we're looking at to see what we can do in the next year or two around that.
Thanks, John. Councillor Seary.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one to go back to the RRF. Sorry, you mentioned it can generate up to 11 megawatts of electricity. So what is the average and what is the income contract with there? And then obviously the district heating network, how much more can we get out of that system as well? Thank you.
Scott, can you answer that?
Yeah, so the way the plant works is it's district energy led. So we will export as much energy as the district energy system can cope with, and depending on demand. So over the winter, we'll export more energy as heat as opposed to electricity. So the demand profile will alter on a daily basis and a seasonal basis, depending on the demand on the heating network. So if you look at the electricity export, it's like the residual energy, if you like. So that's the residual energy that we'll export following after we've extracted the heat energy. In terms of capacity, we've got up to 20 megawatts of installed heat capacity. At a peak at the moment, we're seeing about 6 megawatts, but there's new connections coming on board all year round. So we're expecting that to increase significantly.
Thank you. Councillor Hartbrook, did you have another question?
Yeah, going back to the food waste and the funding, talking around the uncertainty that exists around funding at the moment, and going back to what we're talking of on the merits of genuinely separate food waste collection versus commingled. I think from a strategic level, what we need to do is look at the science behind it. Clearly the funding stream as to what we can deliver is uncertain, but from a technical and an ecological point of view, are there clear benefits or is there a clear gap between a separate food waste collection going to biogas and biodigestion versus a commingled going to compost and venting off to the environment? Is that science clearly understood?
Absolutely, Councillor, and the exact questions that we're trying to look into at the moment, and alongside other questions around practicalities and logistical issues of both types of collection. So, for example, a commingled collection provides a lot of much easier logistical solution to us because it's one set of materials that you're collecting from two sets of materials you're collecting from one bin with one set of crews taking them to one place. And therefore it has a lot of easier ways to be managed. But you're absolutely right. What's therefore the environmentally better solution in terms of whether that be more biogas or however it's measured in terms of carbon impact of the two suggestions, and that's what we're looking at the moment in terms of that. Trying to understand, first of all, we need to understand better what the potential tonnage is. Like I said, that composition analysis is crucial to that. But then we're looking at different ways we could perhaps involve the market as well in those solutions. Because another key thing I can't reinforce this enough is, at the end of the day, whatever solution we come forward with, there has to be a market and an infrastructure that can deal with whatever we collect. So there's no point in us collecting food separately if there's nowhere to take it in the next 3 or 4 years. Similarly, there's no point in going down the commingled route if the market isn't going to provide us with a solution that's economically practical to us. So they're all the questions we are looking at the moment.
And what's the timescales for answering that? And I guess what you're confirming is that we will understand at a detailed level the environment, because clearly the cost and the crewing and the staffing issues, you can project those with, I suppose, with comparative. You know what resources are needed to collect an extra bin. I guess I was looking at in my own ward, which did have food waste obviously collection. We did 736 tonnes collected in 2019, so rolled out across, which from the numbers that I worked out based on the RAP data is roughly at the time about 50% of what theoretically could be collected. So not too bad a number. But I guess do you have a timescale for when we will have the ecological comparison between doing one versus the other?
I'd be reluctant to give an absolute timescale on it, but certainly that sort of information in the next 5 or 6 months we need to be getting to the bottom of, really, to divide to be clear what our own way forward is. But I would hope as well, because clearly the type of discussion happening today should be happening across the whole of the country, and that sort of information should be relevant for almost every council in the country to better understand. So we would hope as well, nationally, we get some better quality information and analysis provided to us as well. It's just interesting to know at the moment, it's slightly puzzling, and I assume it'll be changed, but the resource waste strategy still states the reason for going for separate food waste collection to be to reduce landfill and to reduce methane from landfill, which is, it's a bit strange, really, because elsewhere in other government strategies, it does talk clearly around the need to increase biogas collection from things such as ADs. So I assume at some point the government will join those two things up. But it is interesting to know that at the moment, that's what the government is saying, that the strategy is purely to reduce food going to landfill, which is it does seem a bit strange. But yeah, I would hope within the next 5 or 6 months. But that, like I say, will rely to a large degree on government and national work on this as well.
Okay, I think we are getting to the end of this agenda item. I think one of the things that I've heard several times, which is worth emphasising, is the need for a coherent national strategy on waste. And we know it's due in the new year. And I think we all here will be hopeful that there's an increased focus on the carbon impact, not just the tonnage of recycling. And that goes through the waste stream, whether it's further up on reduce and reuse before we get to recycle. So I think that's something that we need to, as a scrutiny board, make sure we keep aware of and make sure that that's high on the agenda of us and pass on that agenda to anyone who will listen to us. With that, I'm going to close this agenda item, but I would like to thank everyone who's taken the time to come and attend. I know it's been a long item. I know there's lots of work that's gone on behind the scenes. I thank Veolia and HW Martins for taking the time to join us as well. I do appreciate it, and your input has been helpful. I'm going to let Councillor Feet come in, but after that, I'm going to just give, because there's a big changeover before, because everyone here is before the next item, I'm just going to have a 5-minute pause so anyone can use the facilities before the next item. I'll let Councillor Feet just make a final comment.
Thanks, Chair. I'm really, helpful to have Scrutiny's input into this, and for us to kind of move forward with the ways how we can increase our recycling. And I think Leeds is, very well placed to make further progress as a city, in particular how we manage our household waste to best meet the climate change objectives. So, I mean, there are some really good initiatives in terms of 700, John's mentioned, glass banks. We've got Recycling on the Go, which is a very unique initiative which we started here in Leeds, but it's been expanding to other cities. But it's not just about what we do through Recycling on the Go, but I think it's how actually we raise the campaign about recycling, how people take that message home as well, and that has impact on what goes in our bins, at home. And then, pots, trays and tubs, something we actually introduced in the last 2 years, but also that we got one of the largest number of household recycling centres in the city as well. So there are some really good initiatives, and we've already heard about the largest free garden waste collection. I think we as a city, and the administration, we're very keen to kind of move forward, and particularly, the food waste, how we actually manage that. But until we, like John said, until we have a clear kind of guidance and how it'll be funded and what's probably the best way forward, or nationally, I think we'll probably have to explore our options, but we'll have to wait for that to happen. But finally, I like to really, thank our contractors. We don't often get the chance to do that for all the hard work they do, and in particular our staff for the last 20 months. You've put in, if you can pass on our gratitude to everybody involved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Feek. I echo your comments and thanks. And as I said, we'll just have a 5-minute break as we all switch around our seats. Thank you. Okay, everyone. I think we've had more than 5 minutes, so I'm going to start us back up if that's okay. I think we've just got a couple of more colleagues out, and I'm sure they can join us as we get going. So on the next agenda item, I know we've got Mark and Graham. Can you introduce yourself before you start? But we've also got Councillor Cooper. Could you just introduce yourself as well, please?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Councillor Deborah Cooper. I'm the Exec Board Member for Resources and Deputy Leader, Leeds City Council. Can I just say before we start, Chair, unfortunately, I've got to leave at 12:30. And I know you do like to spend a decent amount of time on each inquiry. So I have been sat in the background since 10:15, waiting to come on with the agenda items. So please don't think it's not, I'm not giving enough time to scrutiny. I am, it's just getting it to be timetabled right for when I can be. I've got cabinet and I've got to go for 12:30, so apologies for that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cooper. Mark and Graham, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Mark Mills, Head of Asset Management for the City Council.
Morning, everyone. Graham Sefton. I'm from the Council's HR team.
Thank you very much. So item 8 is about estate realisation, management and employee wellbeing. Just to, so you know, we've all read the papers, so you don't need to go through them in detail, but if there's anything in particular you want to draw out before we start, and then we'll move into questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll give a very quick overview, I suppose, and just draw out a few key points. So as you say, Councillor Scopes, the paper itself is around 3 key issues. One is around the estate management strategy from 2021 through to 2025, the estate rationalisation programme and where we are with that, and particularly reporting back on what we achieved in the last financial year and where we are this financial year, and then a point on employee wellbeing. I think one of the key things that I would probably just draw out is particularly around our estate management strategy and the approach that we're taking. Is that we last had an approved estate management strategy or asset management plan, as it was then, back in 2014. And obviously the world has moved on quite a lot since then. It was moving on anyway, and then the pandemic hit, and that has accelerated a number of things that were already happening in terms of the way that services were changing, becoming more digitally focused. And then clearly the pandemic with the enforced work from home requirements has really moved on the way in which as an organisation, not just ourselves but other organisations as well, have now balanced and brought forward a more hybrid approach to delivery and employee working arrangements, and that's really informed, as well as other pillars such as the climate emergency, that has really informed the estate management strategy, and as set out in the paper, there's 5 key areas that strategy covers, but really focusing on the fact that we need, I suppose underpinning it is the need for us to have an efficient, well-utilised estate, and also being able to afford that estate and then have the right management and maintenance requirements and practices, and ultimately budgets around that. I suppose moving on to the estate rationalisation, that was again something that we were working on anyway, and I think if you look back over certainly the last 10 years, there's been some substantial shifts in the way in which we use our estate, but also the size of the estate. So going back to 2010, we had 17 buildings in the city centre, and now effectively we've got 3. Those buildings look vastly different to how they were used or what they looked like previously, and how they were used previously. And I think that again is something that is really again moving forward and progressing and changing all the time. And so one of the key things that through the staff surveys that have been undertaken and understanding how people want to work in the future and how services will be delivered is around that need for our estate to really fulfill that face-to-face interaction requirement that we have in order to be able to deliver effectively. And that's therefore moving away from just the rows and rows of desks that you've probably traditionally seen. So we've been working across with facilities management and with colleagues in HR and IDS to ensure that there's the rollout of appropriate digital equipment to support hybrid working, as well as to get the most out of employees when they're in the office, but also looking at and changing the way that the workspace is laid out. So creating more collaboration spaces, more meeting spaces, and certainly it's not a point in time. It's a continual journey, and we've delivered some pilot spaces. We're getting feedback from staff who are using those spaces, and that's going to then inform a strategy for rolling those spaces out further across the estate to support the new way of working that we're all going to see. I think one of the key things, and one, I suppose, just really drawing on the estate rationalisation or realisation process, is that last year we came out of a number of properties which set out in the paper. There's a huge amount of hard work behind coming out of each one of those. But I think what we are looking at is opportunities not just to generate savings, but it's really around how we can support service delivery improvements moving forward. So looking at ways in which the services can really define how they're going to deliver in the future, how the digital world may change their way of delivering, and then looking at what the estate requirements may be around that. And one of the things that I suppose we're getting to a stage now where we've probably picked the low-hanging fruit. So we've made the easy moves in many ways in terms of the estate and particularly the office accommodation that we have. And I think moving forward, it's going to be, we are going to be needing to look much more at how services are being delivered in communities and localities, and that then underpinning how we use our buildings differently. And that's reflecting the fact that the majority of buildings that we now have provide some sort of front-facing service function. Now, that might only be a small proportion of the building, because there might be then back office function or storage or whatever in the remainder of the building. But nevertheless, many of the buildings that we're now going to be looking at do have an element of that front-facing service delivery. And so part of our challenge is not necessarily about seeing those services closing. It's about looking at how we can maybe bring them into different buildings. That might improve the customer experience and the way in which residents can access services, but it will also ultimately support how we can make best use of our estate. Like I say, it's not all about savings, it's also about income generation as well, and we do a lot of work with partners to allow them and bring them into our estate. But also, I think notably last year, St George House was a building in the city centre that was an office building. We looked to release that primarily because we didn't need the space anymore, and we'd got the potential to bring in savings. But what we did was flip that into our investment portfolio and lease the building out to the global banking school. So actually collectively, cumulatively, the saving and the additional income totaled about £1 million per annum, just over £1 million per annum. So we are really looking at how we can I suppose leverage our estate to meet the financial challenge, but also support service delivery. So I think they're the key things I would just draw out. I suppose the final point I'd probably say is that, you know, this is something that an area of work that we do a lot of engagement around with staff, with services, with trade unions, with members. And so it you know, when we do start to look at how we can shape the estate moving forward, it's not just a purely officer driven academic exercise. It really is something that we need to bring people along with us. So there is a huge amount of engagement that goes on behind it.
Thank you. Graham, do you want to make any comments?
Yeah, I'll just mention, whilst the report predominantly focuses on the estate this time round, Scrutiny has received, and you have 3 previous reports around employee wellbeing and the results of our survey. The results for the 4th survey you can see in the report today. That was a survey that was conducted in August earlier this year, so it's a snapshot of time from around August. The good news is that the results in terms of wellbeing and support that people receiving are improved on what we saw from October 2020. And one of the issues that gets raised consistently by our staff is around workload pressures. And that's particularly in light of having lost a number of people, you know, between September 2020 and March 21 through Eli, but also in response to service changes that we're seeing too. So since we've received these results, an awful lot of effort has gone into in re-emphasising, you know, right from the top of the organisation, the importance of wellbeing. We've hosted our annual leadership conference in October. The focus of that was mental health and wellbeing, and we're doing all the good work that we've done previously again, which is around one-to-one check-ins with all of our staff, and that's happening now, you know, through to January, to really make sure that individual plans, individual support is there for those that need it. And once again, HR as a service has provided follow-up calls for people who through the last wellbeing survey needed extra support. So whilst the focus is on the estate today, Scrutiny were keen to see the results of the latest survey and the summaries in the pack today. And I'm happy to answer any questions around that as we go.
Thank you very much. Do you want to speak, Councillor Cooper?
Yeah, thank you. Just a few comments really before any Scrutiny member questions. And I would say actually that just to add to what Mark said about the work on our estate really has been ongoing now for many years, I've got to say. So it's not all down to the pandemic as to you know why we're looking to do things differently. We had a programme of changing the workplace which has been ongoing for 5 years and more now. So and also there has been a programme of digital improvement and progress as well that's been ongoing for a long time too. Of course, the pandemic has had an impact, not just financially, but also an impact on the way that we need to use our estate in a different way. But it's not the only thing that's had an impact. Many other things have too. And we have to consider that also that our estate is ageing, and we have got a lot of our estate which is very old and very much in need of improvement to bring up to what we'd want it to be in terms of its own carbon footprint and to be the best that those buildings can be as well. So there's a number of things to consider, but the work being undertaken is underpinned by 5 principles, and you'll find, I'm sure you've read your papers, that they're in there. Please rest assured that we are you know, abiding by those 5 principles and talking to everybody as we go along with this proposal of work as well. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cooper. So open it up to questions. Yeah, Councillor Hamilton.
Just to say, with regards the selling of properties and the leasing of properties, which, you know, obviously I understand. Have we looked at any that could be converted into flats
you know, because we've got 26,000 on the waiting list. You know, obviously, I don't know exactly where those properties are, but have we considered those, especially in the community? Because if we're looking at bringing some services under one roof from the minor ones. So that's what I just wanted to ask, that have we considered looking at converting? Yes, we have to spend money to bring it up, but then we will be getting an income from renting. So, and also just to go on to say that, you know, hope we're not rushing and selling off the properties that we own, and then later on, going back to education Leeds, closing all the schools, and then look where we are. Obviously, I do understand things have changed. We'll do it hybrid working, etc. So, you know, as long as we're ensuring that we're not rushing to sell off all our properties and then end up in a few years' time, the workforce has changed, you know. So, and then just with regards to looking at converting some into flats, because we're desperate houses.
Thanks, Councillor Hamilton. I'll take your second point first, and then I'll come back to the first point. So I think in terms of excuse me, time and speed and decision making, we are really mindful that we're still in a period of uncertainty. You know, over the course of the summer, we were encouraging staff back into the estate, albeit recognizing that people may still be fearful of coming into, you know, maybe traveling on public transport or coming into to buildings. But we have seen people gradually returning. Now, clearly, we're headed into the winter period, and you know, the COVID-19 pandemic situation continues to evolve. So I think what we recognise is that what we do know is that the estate, as Councillor Cooper has said, is not necessarily fit for purpose. It's probably a bit too big. It's probably, you know, certainly it needs to be of a size that we can invest in appropriately. What we equally understand is that it's going to take us some time to be able to understand how services will use our estate, how staff will want to use our estate, and therefore what is the optimum size. So you're absolutely right. It's not about knee-jerk reactions. This is about a planned approach and thinking geographically where we need buildings and the types of buildings that we need. So yes, I think rest assured, you know, this isn't just about us thinking, right, we need to close X building, so we'll close it. In terms of the point around looking at particularly council housing or the opportunities for conversion of our properties, I think there's a number of things that we look at. So first of all, when we're considering the closure of a building, we would look and consider what the either redevelopment or conversion potential of that building or site is. Because the last thing we want to do is cause a further problem down the road, whereby we close a building, decommission something, and then find that actually we're going to really struggle to bring that back into use or sell it or redevelop it in some way. So that's an early piece of due diligence work that we undertake. We also work very closely within the wider asset management and regeneration service, which includes the council housing growth team. And we ensure that as part of us considering the closure of any buildings, that that team are cited on those and have the opportunity to have that cursory look at them, and that's both about looking at the conversion potential, but also the redevelopment potential of those sites. So we have that as in terms of an in-house solution for those buildings. Now, ultimately, in some cases, either because of demand in those localities or because of the specific nature of the site, it may be too small, it's not appropriate to be used for that programme. And then clearly that is when we would look to then any other requirements that the council may have or release through and disposal through the capital receipt programme. So there's a series of steps that we take, and it's not necessarily not everything is necessarily about us just coming out of a building and selling it. We do consider our own use, alternative use as well.
Thanks for that. With regards to conversion, you're saying that it's in the housing team and they're looking at that. My question is it in the ward area, and has the councillors been involved? Because, you know, they might be saying that, oh, we don't think, but we might think it could be right for conversion. And also, just to ask, is any listed buildings involving those selling off that are draining to the council, you know, because obviously the private sector might want those, and obviously they can convert them. Thanks.
No problem. So yes, I think, Councillor, you make a very valid point about ensuring that there's local engagement there. I think there's a few stages, I suppose, that from a council housing growth team they have to go through when they're looking at a site. First of all, it's I suppose the demand that can be supported through housing Leeds, and just understanding the demographics and the nature of accommodation that's required in different localities. I think the second point is then obviously around what the capability is of a specific building being converted, or the site being developed. But I think you're absolutely right. As ward members, you know your area better than anyone, and therefore that consultation does take place once there's an awareness of the schemes that could come forward. And I think what I'll take back from today is I'll link back with Mark Denton, who heads up the council housing growth team, and just make sure that we get that timing right and dovetail it together, because I think that's really important. In terms of heritage buildings, we as a council we have a large number of listed or heritage or sensitive buildings, and you know, everyone jumps to some of the big ticket items, but we have a lot of other buildings and structures. I think you know, they do require more careful consideration in many ways, and I think as part of that process, we have to acknowledge that we may not necessarily be the best custodian of some of those buildings, and therefore we have to think about whether, one, we have a use for them, but also whether there would be interest that would actually sustain those buildings into the future, because clearly what we don't want to see is just them being vacant, derelict and left to deteriorate. So we certainly need, they do require further consideration. We work very closely with colleagues in the council's conservation team, and we are actually doing a review of all of our listed buildings at the moment, because I think they, you know, in some cases it may be more appropriate for us to find a use for those buildings, and given some of the sensitivities, so and in return maybe release other buildings that may not be so sensitive locally, or and not necessarily have quite the same attachment from a local resident perspective. So there's you know, it's definitely a consideration we take. There's a balance to be had, because those buildings are often very difficult to bring up to the right environmental sustainability standards. They also often require additional resources in terms of any refurbishment and long-term ownership of those properties. So it's certainly something that has to be really, really considered carefully, because you know, if we get it wrong, they become such a burden on the local authority.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if I could just offer some reassurance to Councillor Hamilton and other Scrutiny Board members around the housing growth team and the work that they undertake to ensure that we do have consistently numbers of new council housing being built in the city. And in terms of the work of asset management, whether that be through buildings or through land, we try and assist that process as efficiently as we can, and offer to them whatever it might be that they need to get in place to make sure those houses can be built. And if there is land or buildings that's suitable, then I'm sure that they take up that offer, as I know they have done in the past around land in particular. I think the other reassurance I'd just like to give is about the time that you talked about. So are we rushing in to sell off our buildings? And I can just give you some absolute assurance that there is no rush, that the process takes its due process and the fullest of time that it needs to. Some buildings take longer than others for us to get to the stage when that it's actual either a decision about keeping it and improving it, or whether it is disposable at one end or the other. But some of that process can take a number of years, and quite a few years, I've got to say. So it's not something that we're rushing to lightly at all. I think the other thing I'd say is, when we're looking and we're talking about these buildings, aren't we? If we could start with a blank sheet of paper on a map, and decide what we need as a council, and plot out where those buildings would be, that would be a great place for us to make a start. But we haven't. We've got these buildings and we have to try and make the most of them, not just for the council, but for the city, our partners, and for our residents too. So, it's not an easy ask, I've got to say, but, the team are doing the best on that one.
Thank you, Councillor Conrad Hartbrook, Councillor.
That's absolutely fine. A couple of questions. I'm aware there is a bit of a sort of not a dichotomy, but there's two separate things pulling here. There is lack of certainty around ways of working in time ahead. There's also, let's face it, government council financial constraints, which are real and do need to be faced up to. It doesn't seem, however, too far-fetched to assume that we are, as a society, we'll probably move forward 5 years in 1 year or 18 months in terms of the ways of working, and hybrid working and more working from home, I think, will become commonplace. And environmentally, it's the right way to go, because the less people travel, whether it even be by public transport or by private vehicle, is better, and better for mental health as well as social. Is the council looking to identify properties in each of its kind of wards or areas that might be suitable for that? And the other question is, and I apologise, it is slightly loaded because to the local situation, but if there is no rush to sell off council properties, for the property in my ward, the Rothwell Council offices, I think it's a deadline of the 10th of December for submission. That doesn't quite square with what's just been said.
I'm bringing Councillor Cooper.
Yeah, if I could just answer the first point about a rush around Rothwell at council offices, or the building there, which has been empty now since 2017, I think, and has been on the surplus buildings list since then. So if you call that rushing, Councillor Hartbrook, I'm afraid I don't agree with you.
Do you want to comment on any of his other points, Mark or Graham?
I think the only thing I was going to say, it was the point that I've previously mentioned, really, about we are in an evolving world, and I think that is where we do need to see how services will be delivered moving forward. And I think in that respect, what we're not doing is going around ward by ward and saying we've got to make X number of, or come out of X number of buildings, because different wards have different numbers of buildings and equally different demands. So this is where I suppose we've had, and it's grown over the last 2-3 years, is that we've got directorate leads within the asset management service who work with each of the directorates. And through that process, we've really been focusing on getting the directorates understanding to each directorate's understanding to a level, a consistent level around what they're occupying as a directorate. Now, as you can imagine, some directorates have many more properties than others. So communities, environment and housing, clearly, you know, with all the parks and countryside properties, the waste depots and waste facilities, etc., etc. They occupy a large number of buildings. That's not to say that you would want to come out of them all, but it's looking with the services around how they will want to work in the future and how they will want to deliver. Now, that will then inevitably come down to having to say, well, actually, we've probably got too many buildings in a certain geography, and then looking at how we can improve the utilisation of the buildings that we're going to retain long term. And that might mean that we have to relocate service delivery, including maybe some frontline service delivery in the future, from one building to another. But you know, that's in the past, I think we could have potentially been criticised for being very building led, and that's certainly not where the new strategy and certainly how we're working is now. It's very much around the services informing us about how they're going to work, and then we'll come up with an estate solution around that.
Thank you, Councillor Hartbrook.
Yeah, I'd just like to come back to Councillor Cooper. I believe the offices were closed in 2017, but I don't think they were identified for potential disposal in 2017. And obviously we've had a pandemic in that time, and an active group kind of working to find out a proposal to do exactly what the council does. So yeah, I'm not looking to kind of, you know, get any sort of politics into it. I'm just trying to get to a solution where you know, a valuable community asset can be considered, because when I read a lot of what the council is talking around, it's exactly the kind of thing that we're trying to create.
Can I just come in? So conscious that that's probably almost casework. So can I ask Councillor Cooper and Councillor Hartbrook to discuss this outside of that meeting? Your point is a good example as one example, but we do need to make sure that the generic things that we say happen on individual projects. Is that, I'm conscious also Councillor Cooper needs to leave at 12:30.
Yeah, if I can just say, actually, it has been on the surplus list since 2017. On the surplus list doesn't mean that we're putting them to disposal. Actually, it's where we start active engagement with the community to see what that might be in terms of need going forward, and other directorates as well. So all that work has been undergone since 2017, Chair, just so that other Scrutiny Board members are clear about that too. But I'm happy to take the discussion outside the Scrutiny Board on that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cooper and Councillor Hartbrook. Okay, I'm going to bring in Councillor Burke next.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask a question about community asset transfer? And I know that it's happened for years, and some of the groups that have managed to secure that are quite big, or they're already in receipt of council funding. Just wondered, I mean, as ward members, we all know there's kind of smaller groups who perhaps as standalone groups wouldn't be able to, but is there a consideration perhaps to build up consortia in a ward, which would strike me that you could then cover lots of what's needed in that ward. You'd obviously have a lead partner, but I just wondered if it's a consideration, because we as ward members, I'm sure we all know who they are, and we could work together with them to build that consortium approach.
Yeah, good question. And I think community asset transfers have demonstrated in some buildings that they're very successful, actually. So, you know, things like Bramley Baths, Eden Town Hall, some of the community centres, so Kentmere Community Centre, where Leeds Community Spaces have coordinated some of that work. So I think what we're open to is a variety of models as to how things can come forward. clearly what we're very keen to understand when people come forward with proposals is that they've got the capacity, both in terms of resources on the ground as well as the financial resources to be able to deliver a sustainable community asset transfer. Because there's one thing about being able to just put something right, if you can get past that stage, it's how you then sustain it into year 1, year 2, year 5, etc. And so and recognizing that it's very it is often very difficult for smaller groups to come forward with proposals. We are working with the communities team at the moment to look at how we can we can maybe as a council provide more support for some of those groups. I think it's worth saying that there's a number of organisations out there though, such as Locality, who can provide support to community groups as well, if they are looking at community asset transfers. So you know, if there's specific cases that you want to discuss, more than happy for you to contact me outside of Scrutiny, and we can look at what that might look like and the support that may be required. But like I say, ultimately what we're really interested in is making sure that communities are able to sustain a building, but also that they're not overexposing themselves, because I think people can become very wrapped up in the vision, which is really, really good. But you know, we have got to be mindful that, you know, in owning a building and in running a building, you've got so many statutory obligations to protect health and safety, etc., that you've got to take on board. And what we don't want to be doing as an authority is exposing communities, individuals or groups to and not being able to deliver effectively.
Thank you. I would welcome a conversation outside of here. And it's kind of dependent on the size of the building, isn't it, as well? Like the one at Rothwell's, the council offices are huge. But I know there's some small pockets where a consortium of small people could perhaps take that over much more easily. So it's almost two-tiered in my head, which is a strange and wonderful place sometimes. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take that as a comment, Councillor Burke. I think it's a fair comment. Okay, Councillor Carlisle.
Thanks, Chair. Just a comment, really. I think one of the things I've talked about is those people working in different communities, because for some of us, we have to come a fair way into the city centre, but also there are people that won't have the suitable environment to work at home. I've got 2 young kids and I don't necessarily want to spend every day working in that environment. And I'm sure there are many people that work for the council that may not have office in their house, or they've got a few of them working at home. So I think that pilot project around that's mentioned in the report around looking at the community hubs is really valuable. And I think just an aside on that is, I think we've seen over the last 18 months how valuable that community hubs program has been. The fact that we've been looking at, and I know asset management have been involved in this quite a lot, looking at bringing services to people rather than out. So selling some buildings or disposing of some buildings in the city centre has led to actually ingrained services within neighbourhoods, and I think that's really valuable and a really, really good way forward. And I know that that's based on the principles that come out of this approach. So just a comment to say thanks for that, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'll take that as a comment, but I recognise everything you're saying there. Thank you very much. Councillor Jenkins.
Yes, just to follow on from through you, Chair, what Councillor Cahill said. So on Saturday, I was at, and I think the scheme of using community assets and so on is really good. But I was at the library in Seacroft on Saturday, and we're faced with this dilemma of heating the building, but also having all the windows open and the doors open, and everybody was dying of hypothermia at the same time as trying to protect themselves from COVID. So because I think this winter is going to be quite cold, and the library is somewhere where people who can't afford to heat their own homes perhaps can go, but it's going to be a slight problem if you're going to if the place is actually too cold to sit in. So it's only a comment in a way, but I've taken it up with the library's section to see what can be done health and safety wise.
I don't know if you can comment on that specifically, Mark, but I mean, we've had it in this building ourselves. Our last meeting, I think it's Councillor Venner was here and wasn't happy with the temperature in the room. Understandably, it was really cold, but the circulation system can actually do that for us. So I think there is a piece around our buildings.
Yeah, it's not something that comes under my remit solely, but we are working very closely with facilities management, who are doing a lot of monitoring of air quality within the buildings, and obviously then working through how some of the dilemmas there, Councillor Jenkins, that you've just talked about.
Some of it, I think, is probably about sharing knowledge, making sure we know which systems bring in external air anyway. But I think you're right, it's probably not directly your department. I'm going to bring in Councillor Flynn next.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, a couple of things. It covers both of the subjects you're on about. But just as a starter for sort of 10, I was just wondering why no one from IT was here. He's gone. Why there's nobody from IT here? I mean, what you're actually planning is very much dependent on an IT system, and there's nobody here.
I mean, we have had that.
But they're not here today.
They're not here today. You're right. Rob, do you have a comment on that?
They have contributed to this inquiry, Councillor Flynn, but you are right. They are not here today due to the focus of the report, but perhaps something for me to take on board.
Okay, I asked because it took me 2 hours to get here this morning talking about public transport. 3 buses never turned up, going home and digging my car out to get here to find out my iPad isn't working. I can't access the council server, and neither can the lead member. So the lead member and the shadow lead member can't actually read the papers for this. That's why there's crap all over my sort of table here. Hybrid working from home, agile working, I've got another expression for it, which I won't use here, and working in an office basically depend largely on IT. So the papers actually talk in terms of, I think, meeting rooms, hybrid meeting rooms, having to be tested and reviewed and various other things. A lot of money going into IT infrastructure and so on and so forth. If we haven't actually got the IT in place, working and tested and all the rest of it, I accept that we're not rushing to get rid of a lot of buildings and all the rest of it. What we are rushing to is hybrid working. Why are we doing that without having an IT system in place?
I don't know if you can answer that specifically, Mark. I mean, you can do, Councillor Cooper.
I don't think it's really for Mark to answer, as he, he's not from IDS. But I do understand that there's been different kind of focuses to the different meetings that you've had a scrutiny, and IDS have formed part of the previous meeting and did attend and spoke around their work. This really was around the estate, looking at our estate and buildings and ways that we need to look at that going forward, as well as the staff, HR, to do with the staffing and their responses to the surveys and how we might look to agile working. I accept, Councillor Flynn, that there's a huge element of IT expertise needed within that, but that's the reason that they're not here today, because I think there were slightly different focuses. And I accept that we have issues with IT, but we're on a transformational programme with our IDS work, and that's still ongoing at the moment. So occasionally we're going to have blips where we can't access it and need to use other means, such as the paper that you've got today. I relied on previous emails to get my papers. So there are different ways of doing it, but yeah, apologies that it's not in the right format for you today, Councillor Flynn.
Just also to say that the IDS are coming back in February on this ongoing inquiry.
I understand that, Debbie, and I fully understand. It's nothing to do with you. I was I was hoping to see IT here this morning for obvious reasons, but they're not obviously here. But just one of the issues, one of the things that's actually in the report talks about, and I'll read it out. One of the risks, the key risks to the strategy, is to ensure a robust evidence-based approach is taken. A substantial amount of data must be brought together, but some of the data required may be difficult to identify, and the new management system is still some distance away. It's just a comment, and I just wonder how we expect these new ways of working to work if I can't get my bloody iPad to work this morning. And in fact, I didn't have a chance to go through all my emails because it took me 2 hours to get here. And when I get here, the damn thing's not working.
I take it as a comment, but I would say that it's interesting that it's not working when you're in the office. And so the issue isn't necessarily around agile working, it's an issue with the IT system more generally.
I was going to come on to that, Andrew. I don't care where I am, it's not working.
Yeah, exactly.
It could be anywhere.
Yeah,
actually,
and so in terms of estate rationalisation, that's an IT question specifically.
Which is what this paper is all about. We've got here today, and they're not here to ask.
Well, this question is about estate management, estate rationalisation, and employment well-being.
Key risks.
And it is a risk, and IDS are coming in February because this is one element of the inquiry.
Okay, I've passed that one. I'll go on to the staff surveys now, Graham. You've quoted a lot of statistics and 60% being happy or fairly happy or whatever, but that's based on a very small percentage of surveys returned. Is that right?
Yeah, what we found over the years that we've been doing the surveys, probably in the region of 25 to a third of staff take part in the wellbeing surveys.
But you've extrapolated, those figures out, which is not really scientific to do. Have you any way of knowing whether the 4 surveys you've got the responses from the same people or are they different people? And have you any way of knowing how many surveys came in from the people who are using new ways of working, or the people who are actually coming into the office or working where they normally work?
Yeah, I can provide a fuller data for you, Councillor Flynn, in terms of answering some of these questions, but you're right, the majority of people who do tend and have completed the surveys have been those working from home, mostly, but increasingly we have had a greater proportion of people in frontline roles who've also taken part. So we're working on that all the time, to get the response rate up, and also to make sure that there's a full completion by all the different staff types that we have. In terms of the question about do I know if it's the same people completing the survey, because we've had between 3,500, 5,000 people completing the survey each time, I'd have to take that away and look at that about whether we've got a consistent group of people who complete the survey or whether it's different people each time.
Yeah, I'd just caution against using the statistics from a relatively small sample, which isn't scientific. We all know the reasons why it's not scientific, as a basis for for producing sort of any further work. Just in closing, Mark, you start off by saying that it was all based around providing quality of service to the public, and both of you will know, because that's a thing I bang on about all the time. How do you know that we're actually providing a high quality of service to the public? We've got lots of surveys from members of staff, lots of people moving around. The vast majority of every report that I see is about how it affects staff or how it affects the estate or this, that, and the other. There's a recognition that there's a quality of service that has to be given continues to be given to the members of the public, but it forms a very small part of every single report that I look at. And I wonder why it isn't the major point. We know all about the 3 pillars. The major pillar, the thing that actually underpins why we're all here, is providing a service to the public. Can we be absolutely confident that we are providing as good a service to the public as is possible, given all the swaps and changes and places closing down and staff not working where they should be working, or sitting on a bus or waiting for a bus or whatever?
I can come back in on that initially, I suppose. So I suppose in terms of that quality of service question, that is one for the individual services to really consider. And I think that is the reason why we've got the arrangements now that we do have between my asset management service, I suppose, and each of the directorates, to ensure that we have that, that I suppose the estate is a facilitator, and therefore, you know, the services can focus on thinking about how they deliver the services, whether those services are right and whether they're achieving the outcomes that they want to achieve. And then clearly we need to fit in with how the estate works. I suppose if I can just pick up on two other points. I think in terms of service delivery, we've inevitably, as part of these conversations, get very focused on the office accommodation. And I think what we've also got to be really mindful of is we have a wide variety of other buildings and sites right across the city, particularly depots, which have probably not even seen the levels of investment that we've seen in offices such as the Civic and Merrion. And I think that very much comes back to that frontline service delivery, and are we delivering the right services or good quality services to people. And one of the things that we are going to be, well, we're not going to be, we are looking very closely at is how we can ensure that our depot sites are seeing the same same type of consideration that we see and have been undertaking around our offices. And that might well be about looking at one, whether we've got too many depots, but then it's also about making sure that those depots and other facilities are fit for purpose and able to support that service delivery. The other point, I don't want to prolong the IT point, Councillor Flynn. You're right. It's absolutely fundamental in terms of making sure that the workspace that we have works, and a key component of that is around the IT, but also the wider IT infrastructure. And as has been alluded to, there's been a lot of investment and change over the course of the last year, 18 months, into Microsoft 365, MS Teams, etc. And that has really improved the albeit not today, improved the environment that we all work in. I suppose the point that you were picking up from the report was specifically really talking about our estate management systems, because for actually what we have is quite at present quite a disparate range of different IT systems that support the investment portfolio, the land gazetteer or land terrier system, and then unfortunately we have a lot of spreadsheets. And what we have been doing and are continuing to do is work with our colleagues in IDS to bring forward and explore what we're terming at the moment an enterprise estate management system, which is trying to bring each of these disparate components into a single system, not just for asset management, but something then that other services such as legal, finance, facilities management, and others beyond those can then access for real-time live data and information about the estate, rather than us having to go searching through spreadsheets. So that's a piece of work, and I suppose it's that piece of work that risk that you quoted is specifically in relation to. I hope that helps.
Can I just in terms of the data that Councillor Flynn is talking about, is the point around the data in terms of service delivery, does feel like there is a challenge for estate management team yourselves to get some kind of data, at least some base data from the directorate, so we can look at whether it has improved or otherwise services over time. So I just put that as a comment and a challenge. Councillor Cooper, you want to come in as well?
Yeah, sorry, Chair, and I am going to have to go after this comment, unfortunately. But just to say about the service, the impact on the service, and is it of any of this, and also what that quality of service might look like. I suppose it depends on the purpose of the building. So if the building is service frontline service focused, then it's the work that's done with the directorate around that service. So perhaps that data then needs to come here, or that information at least around the point, the purpose of the building and its history, and how that service delivery has compared in terms of quality And also in terms of if it's front facing, in terms of people and residents using it as well, and what that experience has been like as well. But often we may be talking about buildings that are not service focused. So in that case, then there's two types of building that we're looking at in those terms, really. But can I thank Scrutiny for their inquiry into this? I think it's really important that Scrutiny members have sight of all these issues, that it is transparent and open, the work that's ongoing at the moment within asset management around all of this. But if there's one plea, I'd ask you just to remember that we need to be flexible, especially in these challenging times, of difficult financial times, but also within terms of the pandemic. Who knows where we're going to be in 3 weeks' time at the next Prime Minister's press conference, and what we might be asked to do at that point in time. So we also, as a local authority, need to remain flexible in terms of our use of buildings as well. But I apologise, Chair, I must go at this point. So, but thank you, Scrutiny.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Flynn, do you want to come back?
Really, it's all right, Debbie, you can choose off. It was really only to say I absolutely agree with the rationalisation of the estate programme, and if anyone can work anywhere other than the workplace and do it efficiently and effectively, and in the same way as they do if they were in a workplace, then I'm more than happy with it. The point I'm making, as you both well know, but I just want to put it on the record here, is that it must not in any way impact or affect the high quality of service that the residents of this city are entitled to deserve. And I do think that sometimes all of us, every one of us, tends to lose sight when we're desperately trying to get something done. At the end of all of this, there's a resident wanting his bin went, I won't mention bins, wanting something else emptied or anything else emptied and all the rest of it. And if I'm struggling to get a hold of somebody, and I am trying to get hold of an officer on a Friday afternoon, it's like finding a needle in a haystack. It's absolutely impossible. Don't talk to me about Teams or Skype and all the rest of it. They all disappear. There's millions of, I don't know where they go to, but there's nobody available on Friday afternoon. If I can't get hold of anybody, how can a resident get hold of them? It's just not on. See ya.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn.
I'm done.
You're done. Okay, thank you. Okay, just thank you for raising those points. And the other point I think you're probably thinking of, Councillor Flynn, is that actually all the work we do, whether it's specifically frontline or even if it's back office accounting functions, actually is about service delivery for our residents. Everything, and if it's not, we've probably got our focus a little bit squiffy. So just a question for Graham, I think probably. It's around our strategy for our HR policies for home working. And I guess the questions we've asked about before around how do we support junior staff? So things like, can we require people to come into the office to do support and team building stuff? And have we, or are we doing something around training our managers for managing people who you only see once a month, once every other month? And I think that's a really key element of the management structure, which is sometimes probably easier to do when you can see someone.
Yeah, thanks for that, Councillor. We are currently working up some proposals which we can bring back here to scrutiny around training, not just of managers but teams, in terms of new ways of working. That'll cover a whole range of things, in terms of performance, getting the best from the team, getting the best from the IT. It'll be the full suite of different angles that we'll address. We're in conversations with trade unions as we speak around wider policy areas, and there's national negotiations taking place around future working policies, and particularly that bit around how training has changed and needs to change to support new starters, those people who are early in their careers. We've done some work across the council, and that'll be brought back as part of those proposals about how we need to work differently around doing that going forward. So yes, all of that's in motion and can come back in the new year.
Thank you, Graham. Okay, Councillor Burke.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a couple of comments, if I may. One, I think whilst resident satisfaction and happiness should be at the forefront of everything we do. I think sometimes we assume what that looks like, because some residents would never want to come into one of our buildings and queue and stand in line with other people. They just don't. And some people don't want to do it online. So I don't think there's a one size fits all. I think that's about what suits the resident. And I think we just need to be mindful of that and not assume that change is always bad without doing perhaps a wider bit of consultation. Just to comment on the staff satisfaction survey, I've got to disagree with you, because I think a 77% return is one of the highest satisfaction surveys I've ever seen, and I've kind of been involved with lots and lots of them. So just wanted to say well done for getting that many back.
Just to clarify, it wasn't 77%, it was about a quarter to a third
right.
of staff who completed the survey.
Well, yeah, okay, but it says
in terms
here,
of, yeah, in terms of do people feel happy,
just over
satisfied?
3/4
Yeah,
of staff, 77%. So perhaps that needs to be clarified, because that makes it look like the fourth survey, 66% of people responded and then 77. So perhaps.
And if I can, I just want to offer some reassurance around that in terms of our decision making going forward. Remember that survey is just one aspect of a much fuller and broader communication engagement piece we do and have been doing since the spring. So things like our team engagement, one-to-one check-ins with all staff, building it into the appraisals where we know we get 98% completions, where wellbeing's a real focus. So that is just one element of a much broader engagement piece that's informing all of our decisions going forward.
Thank you, Graham. And just on the point about how we contact or people contact the council, the contact centre coming to a members meeting first in December and then to a public meeting in February. So we'll be able to talk about the different aspects and different ways of contacting the council. Okay, I can't see anyone else indicating. So thank you very much for coming. We'll note Councillor Flynn's comments about IDS and the system to make sure they're aware of that before they turn up in February. With that, I thank you. Well, I mean, I hope they've thought about all the questions Councillor Flynn has raised before they have written their strategy, written the paper, and if they haven't, that would be a concern. So thank you very much, Mark and Graham, for coming. You're welcome to go. And I think we've got Alex here for the next agenda item 9. Yeah, Paul, thanks for waiting patiently, Alex. Well, speak for yourself, Councillor Hamilton. Okay, Alex, if you can assume we've all read the paper. If you've got anything specifically you want to highlight, please do that, and then we'll move into questions.
Yeah, no, thank you, Councillor Scopes. This report is essentially a follow-up from a report in July, and it gives the sort of the latest position not only on agency work but also on overtime, an update on some of the issues that particular services are facing, some of the progress that's been made, and some of the further work that needs to be done. And I suppose what we're sort of stressing is that our patterns of demand have been distorted still by the effects of the pandemic, in terms of not so much the pandemic itself now, but the sort of the recovery work and the backlogs that services are dealing with. And I think it's probably worth saying as well, live at the moment, some of the winter pressures that are affecting especially social care. But nevertheless, taking all that into consideration, the spend looks as if it will be about the same as it was last year at the mid-year point. There's some comments on some of the larger services, and I think in fairness, some of the frontline services, they're the areas that we do need to do some more work with. But yeah, I will mention IDS. IDS is an example of shown where they've reduced some of their reliance on agency workers by bringing some of that work in-house. So there's a positive note there around some of the spend in terms of the use of, I guess, very specific technical experts that come in and support. And I've also mentioned highways, which actually have a very low agency and overtime spend, but as a service, they do commission quite considerable sort of large scale capital infrastructure programs. And there's an example there of the flood alleviation scheme where there is quite a high spend on consultants. So it's not always just agency workers as individuals coming into our workforce. Sometimes we're buying a whole sort of package of a service to support us with a big one-off program. So there's some comments on the services, and then the report goes on and identifies some of the issues that still need to be looked at with services, with some budget proposals that we're now preparing, which would provide for some reorientation of some of the HR team to work with services in a much more targeted way, to look at some of the things that we know can help reduce some of the cover requirements that would save money in terms of, I guess, cash. So one of the aspects of work is to look at things like sickness and attendance, whether or not there are any backlogs in terms of processing that, and to support managers around that. You've heard a little bit already today about some of the wellbeing initiatives, but I think one of the things that we want to do is to make that relevant to the frontline workers. So, if people are working part-time and remotely, we would need to be able to sort of make sure that that reaches everybody. To look at maybe things like leave, there is still a carryover of leave that's still affecting certain services, and whether or not we could be a bit smarter with some of the leave booking. To look at some of the recruitment processes to see whether they can be a little bit slicker, especially in a tightened recruitment market, and to look at some of the sort of underlying questions about whether or not the rotas that we have are robust enough to alleviate the need for extra cover. And in doing all this, we don't want to go in and do a sort of a lot of support for managers. We want to make sure that managers are equipped to deal with it in the future. And then finally, the report talks a little bit about the ELI program, because I understand the board were interested in, I guess, have we got enough controls in place to prevent a rehiring of staff? So we had around 800 staff leaving, and the report goes into some of the processes in terms of how business cases for ELI were scrutinised to ensure that not only they saved enough money, but they were sustainable in terms of we weren't letting staff go where we knew we'd have to replace them. And then it talks about some of the control measures in terms of where posts are deleted, how budgets are adjusted to reflect the savings that need to be generated through ELI, and how we have checks both in terms of post releases, but also when restructures occur to make sure that that's in place. And I think the proof of the pudding is that we're probably at the staffing level that we forecast we'd expect, with a large number of staff leaving in the back end of last year, and that now both showing in terms of there hasn't been a growth in headcount, and equally that we are still saving money on the staffing budget. So that's the report.
Thank you very much for that. Just to comment, as waiting for people to indicate, it's interesting. Paragraph 8A, we can see the sickness levels creeping up, and I don't know if that's an indication to overall well-being, but I assume you're working with Graham on that sort of item. I'll leave that as a comment and bring in Councillor Carlyle, who's indicated.
Thanks, Chair. I guess it's more of a comment really, or a question of what the best focus is here, because we had a discussion over agency workers and overtime previously, and there's always this difficulty of what's the right number in which service, because as alluded to in the report, and probably quite timely, some of the services we're talking about expertise and specialist consultants that would cost a lot more money were we to pay them all year round, and it's much better to bring in that when you need it. But a lot of the things, I mean, if you look at highways, a lot of the overtime is responsive overtime for people such as gritting, which we need them when we need them, and they do an absolutely sterling job doing work that I wouldn't want to do at 4 a.m, and hence they are paid overtime to do so. So I think when we look at the figures on this report, it's really hard to know what is an incredibly valuable service that our teams are providing, or we're building in expertise in order to provide that, and what is additional overtime or agency spend that is an issue with being able to deliver what residents in Leeds could expect without them. And I think that's what's really hard about these numbers. We may be able to look at them and say, oh, in highways, that's perfect. That's where we'd expect it to be, because we know that it will be for these particular areas, whereas in other services that might not be the same. So it's a really difficult model there, and a difficult one for us to scrutinise, really.
Thank you, Councillor Carlyle. Alex, I don't know if that's data you could get for us.
It's data that's difficult to get. I think what I'd sort of say from working on this for quite a while is it's always a moving feast. That often the needs in a particular service require agency workers to come in, and then that gets resolved, and then something else comes up which requires different types of agency workers to come in, or different overtime. And even the things that perhaps because of their seasonality are predictable, it's still better to have the flexibility to use overtime than to have a permanent crew. So, you know, we know that there's going to be days and evenings when we need to do gritting. We just don't know when they are. So the best way is to have staff on an on-call rota and pay them overtime when we need their expertise and, you know, the great job that they do. So it's very hard, I think, to give you some overall permanent position. This is the equation. I think what we can do is we can keep coming back and saying this is what's going on at the moment, and this is what we're doing to make sure it's optimized. And if it's, you know, it requires some changes in terms of how services and resource will work on it. And I think that's what I've tried to get across in the report. And I think it's one that you just need to check in every so often and ask, you know, have we got the right resources in the right place doing these things? And is it the most efficient way of doing it? Hopefully that answers your question. And then Councillor Scopes, you were just sort of mentioned about sickness. You're right, it is a concern, and that is something that we're working on at the moment.
Thank you very much. Councillor Siri.
Yeah, it's a good question, really. Same as Peter's. You know, you look at the top line figure, 20 million agency overtime work, but when you go into that, the gritting overtime, that's key, and highways, you know, some of that is spend that, you know, if we employed them full time, we'd be wasting staff. So I think a little bit more detail would be useful from some of the departments about where it's gone into.
Is that something you think you can provide, Alex?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, obviously, for conciseness, this sort of picked up a few of the issues that they said they were facing at the moment. But yeah, I'm happy to go back and talk to a number of the services and get more detail on, you know, what is overtime used for. Could they give more examples and what they're doing about it? So there's no problems with that at all.
Yeah, thank you. And I think the point that Councillor Carlisle made around, or you made to Councillor Carlisle's point around it changing. So it might be one issue this year and another issue next year, is worth making sure you highlight that. Okay, I'm going to bring in Councillor McKenna next.
Thank you, Chair. It's basically on the same question all the time. I'm reluctant to actually raise a chair because in my former life I was a trade union convener, and I'm actually raising issues regarding workers, manual workers within the organisation. I don't want to give too much detail, Alex, but if you would like to talk to me afterwards, I'm willing to have that conversation. But I recently come across an individual who talked about he was earning £400 a week in overtime, £1,600 a month. Well, to my way of thinking, I'm afraid that's a job there he's doing two jobs. And I didn't think that we would allow that level of employment overtime. And it seems to me that there's something very basically wrong when that's happening. I can't give you details, and I think I'll leave it there, Chair, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll take that as a comment, and it might be worth feeding that into any data you provide us, Alex, in terms of overtime, particularly whether there's individuals that are working effectively two jobs.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important point. There's an absolute minimum standard that we expect in terms of health and safety and the working time regulations to apply. Beyond that, there are sometimes occasions in certain services where patterns of absence and vacancies and things like that have necessitated certain workers to, you know, come forward and do that, because the other alternative is to get agency workers in, which also has certain consequences. But the work that we said we'd do to look at some of the rotas and make sure that they're robust enough should actually sort of, I think, tease out whether or not we have got people that are working two jobs, which shouldn't be the case, should it, if that's a continuous arrangement. But from time to time, people do find themselves in positions where they do put a lot of overtime in because of certain situations in teams.
Thank you, Councillor McKenna and Alex. Councillor Jenkins.
Yeah, my question is about whether the council, particularly in adult social care and maybe children's services, has looked at setting up an in-house bank. This may be ongoing, but any information would be useful. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I think that was covered in the previous scrutiny meeting where we talked about how this might operate. I think setting up a bank is in theory quite easy to do. In practice, it's quite hard, that you have to keep in contact with lots of people. And you have to provide enough work to keep people interested, which is why we use agencies, because they've got a much wider pool of people that they can call on and a much wider pool of work that they can offer people. So I think it's something that, you know, we perhaps may need to consider as some of the work that we're sort of doing around the winter pressures. But we looked at, I think it was York City Council we previously cited, where they'd spent quite a lot of time developing an in-house service, but it was very, very small. And when we talked to them, it really did sort of boil down to a number of recurring pieces of work where it really was perhaps simpler just to give someone a job. So we can have a look at it again, but I think there are some overheads that we need to consider about how effective that would be.
Yeah, I think it is worth looking at again. I think the question around whether we can just employ people to fill gaps that we have permanently is one that we should also be taking really seriously. And I think that's the point, back to Councillor McKenna's question, where you're saying, is this another job? Thank you, Councillor Jenkins. Do you want to go back? No, Councillor Flynn.
It's really just to complement what the question's just been asked. How close a watch is the council keeping on social workers in general, in terms of they're the people who look after the most vulnerable people in the city? I think in October that there were reports of high levels of children's social workers leaving because of better pay elsewhere, and because they were required to work in a hybrid manner and they didn't want to do it. That's the first one. And the second one is just going back to the point you made at the start, Andrew, about sickness. Have you any idea why the sickness levels have gone off? Is it COVID related? I noticed that it's higher in frontline staff rather than doings. A little bit more information on that, if you've got it, please.
Okay, certainly I'd probably need to get some information separately around turnover and retention of social workers, which I can happily share with you, but I haven't got any sort of information in my head at the moment on that. In terms of the sickness, it will tend to be the same reasons that we normally have for sickness, which will relate to stress in particular, hence our work around wellbeing and a focus there, but also things like musculoskeletal disease as well, which affects a lot of our frontline staff. So we are looking into how we can address and turn that around more effectively. It probably, I think the statistics that we're quoting here won't include some of the COVID related absences in the council, but I think it does include long COVID, which is a small underlying trend, but nevertheless something that we are conscious of.
Could you make sure you clarify that and feedback to the board whether it does or doesn't include COVID absences?
Certainly.
Thank you. And thanks for raising that point, Councillor Flynn, about care workers. I think that's something we'd all be interested in keeping an eye on to ensure we have a strategy to make sure we have enough carers in our city. Thank you. So are there any other questions? No. Okay. So thanks for coming, Alex. I think we've given you quite a few jobs to take away with you. So we look forward to hearing from you in the near future. Yeah, thank you, Alex. Okay. Okay, so now we're moving on to the work schedule. I'll just see if Rob wants to say anything before we move.
Thanks, Councillor Scopes. Conscious of time, really, I covered most of it in the introductory section on the minutes. Key things to note, the working group in December, which is now expanded, as I said earlier, and then the work programme Appendix 1 provides the latest update in terms of the items that are coming. Councillor Scopes also referred to the economic income and spend section, which is another piece of work we're working on in the background. I think that would be it, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Jenkins.
This is slightly historical because it's an issue about welcome to Yorkshire. So it was an issue that the Scrutiny Board covered last year, I think. It'd be useful, I think, maybe to get a further update on its progress or not, or viability as well.
Thank you, Councillor Jenkins. I'll take that away and work with Rob on that. Councillor Flynn.
I just wonder, given that we've talked quite a lot about the quality of service to the public, whether we could get some kind of a report of someone. There's a regular report goes to the corporate leadership team from each of the directorates explaining what their work pressures actually are at present and what the reasons are for it. That's where I got the issue about the children's social workers leaving this council. Not quite sure how it fits into our remit, but you know, if we're not delivering a high quality of service, what's the point of any of us being here? You know.
Thanks for that, Councillor Flynn. What I'll do is I'll talk to Rob about whether it fits in our remit, and if it doesn't, where it would fit, because everything the exec board does should fit in someone's scrutiny remit, in my opinion. Did someone else indicate on this side and I didn't see? No. Does anyone else want to comment? No. Okay, so with that, thank you very much everyone for your time. I think we've had a really thorough debate on a few items, all of them that we've had on the agenda. So thank you very much for your time and see you next time.